Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Wildfires continue to rip through Los Angeles with almost 180,000 people under evacuation orders and iconic landmarks damaged. The funeral of the 39th President Jimmy Carter has taken place in Washington, attended by all 5 living US presidents. Elon Musk prepares for a sit-down interview with Germany's right-wing AfD party leader, with European leaders calling it intrusive and pretentious. And when will the war in Gaza end? Al Arabiya asks Israel's energy minister Eli Cohen, who provides 2 key conditions. To our top story, and many homes and landmarks in California have been destroyed as wildfires tear through the Los Angeles area. 5 people have died and almost 180,000 people under evacuation orders. Fire chiefs have called it a tragic chapter for the city. The mayor of Los Angeles has been speaking in the last hour and had this to say.
I spoke with President Biden today and Governor Newsom earlier today, and they assured me of full federal and state support. As we head into tonight, we are still facing strong and erratic winds. In Palisades and in Sylmar, we are very much in an active firefight. I can report to you that the Woodley fire, however, in the Sepulveda Basin is under control. I can also report that finally air operations have resumed, and that is a big deal, but it is up to the winds as to how long the air support can continue.
We can now go live to the Hollywood Hills to speak to showbiz presenter and LA resident Ross King. Ross, thank you so much for joining us this evening. You live in the Hollywood Hills beside the Hollywood sign, one of the most famous landmarks in the area. How close are the fires to you, and is that famous sign at risk? Ross, apologies, you're just muted. Would you mind unmuting yourself for me?
Sorry about that. Yes, there we are. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear now. Yeah, came very close last night. We had what was called the Sunset Fire, which happened at Runyon Canyon, which is just the next canyon over from me here. And we were really, really concerned at just how close the fire was getting, because the simple fact of the matter is that one tiny ember from any of the fires can carry for many miles and just set off another fire. And that's exactly what had happened with the Sunset Fire. So it was a little close for comfort last night. We weren't under our mandatory evacuation, but we were actually told that we just had to sit tight for a little bit. But it was very much a case of ready, set, go. The car was packed. We'd put all the belongings that we could in the car, have the car facing the right way, and then we're ready to go. But thankfully, in the past couple of hours, they've taken away that evacuation risk. So thankfully, things are a little bit calmer at the moment. But again, as Mayor Bass was saying there, it's the winds that you have no control over. Mother Nature, such a force. And the Santa Ana winds, they're warm, they're swirling. Thankfully, through the night, they were able to get the helicopters up there to actually drop water on the Sunset Fire. And that really saved so much there, because where it is, right up above Hollywood, and so they were terrified that the actual the whole actual sorry, there's alarms going off absolutely everywhere at the moment. We're just a little bit on tenterhooks, because suddenly you get a call to say there's another fire and we have to move. But basically, they were worried that the fire was going to sweep down actually into Hollywood itself. So the whole area where you have places like the Dolby Theatre, where the Oscars come from, the Hollywood Walk of Fame, places where people go when they come out here on holiday, that was all under evacuation and so densely populated. So people really concerned there.
Ross, I just want to say it's really a pleasure to have you on. I know that you're contending with a lot at the moment, but you're also a showbiz reporter. Many high-profile celebrities have sadly lost their homes. We've seen pictures on social media, almost looks apocalyptic. Paris Hilton, Billy Crystal, Ricky Lake and Adam Brody, just some of them. Have you been following them on social media, and are you in touch with anyone who has lost their home?
Yes, sadly, I have now 5 friends who've completely lost their homes in the Pacific Palisades and in Malibu as well. As you said, a lot of famous people, a lot of movie stars have lost homes. Paris Hilton talked about her place in Malibu where she had so many memories, brought up so many childhood memories, and in fact wanted to have memories there now with her own children. Absolutely devastating. Again, it doesn't matter whether it's a multi-million-dollar home, Leigh Ann, or whether or not it's a tiny home. They are people's homes, and that is what people are losing at the moment. It is devastating. You mentioned the word apocalyptic, and that really is how it's been. When you see the pictures, and, it's weird because I sit here, I watch the TV, see the pictures, and then realise that it is literally, just a mile or two away from me as well. It's a very, very hard watch. But again, Mother Nature doesn't care whether you're big, rich, famous, whatever. It will just take whatever it wants.
Yes, indeed. But people have really come together. Communities seem to be strong at this time, and we're hearing that Airbnb and lots of restaurants have been reaching out and offering help to anyone who is affected. Like you say, it is densely populated. People of all different ranges live in the area. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and the spirit that's currently happening around you?
Yeah, there's an amazing sense of community at the moment. Everyone texting each other saying, if you're evacuated, come to my house. You'll be safe there. It really is quite incredible, the spirit that is here at the moment. I know that the world of politics has been trying to raise its ugly head here at the moment. And of course, the bottom line at the moment is there will be a lot of talk about what could have been done better, what hasn't been done right. But that's not the time for that at the moment, I don't think. The simple fact of the matter is we all have to come together. We have to try and look after each other. As you were mentioning, a lot of the hotels, I know the Fairmont Hotel in Santa Monica has taken in so many people there because they're right beside Pacific Palisades, which is absolutely destroyed. Basically, 70% of that place has gone. I mean, you cannot believe it when you see it from the air. It's just absolutely frightening and devastating. But yeah, Uber have been offering rides, restaurants offering food. It really is an incredible sense of community out here at the moment.
Ross, fire chiefs have called this a tragic chapter for the city, with so many significant buildings, as you've told us, and famous streets being destroyed by these devastating fires. Do you think LA can ever really recover from something like this?
I think it's going to be a long, long time before we recover out here, both just in the physical side of things of rebuilding. As I said, at least 70% of the Palisades has gone. And, that was such a beautiful place, and to rebuild that is going to take such a long time. And also, I think from within, what people have gone through. Again, I find myself very, very lucky that, in the end, I was just out briefly and my house is here. But I know that feeling of when you're actually having to leave and you're thinking, what do I take with me? What do I leave behind? You take photographs of the house because you think you may not come back to a home. And that's what's happened for thousands of people out here. And it's going to be a real slow build back. I think, obviously, at the end of the day, it is Los Angeles. It's Los Angeles County. They're strong here. But this has just been the biggest blow. And as I said, it's the most destructive fire in LA history, and it has affected so many people.
Ross King, I just want to say a massive thank you for joining us, and I'm so glad that you're safe, and I hope it stays that way. Thank you once again. That is a showbiz presenter and LA resident there, Ross King. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah.
Staying with the wildfires now, and President-elect Donald Trump has slammed California's Governor Gavin Newsom for his handling of the disaster, claiming firefighters haven't had enough water in their hydrants to tackle the blaze. Here's a reminder of just what he had to say.
if those people leave, you're going to lose half your tax base of California. This is a true tragedy, and it's a mistake of the governor, and you could say the administration. They don't have any water. They didn't have water in the fire hydrants. They don't have water. And yet they have, the water comes from, you know where? Up north. And it comes down at levels, they give millions and millions of barrels of gallons of water that they have, and they send it out into the Pacific. For the Pacific, it's like a drop, it's nothing. But for California, it would take care of the whole state. So what's happened is a tragedy, and the governor has not done a good job. With that being said, I got along well with him when he was governor. We worked together very well, and we would work together. I guess it looks like we're going to be the one having to rebuild it. But what happened there, I don't think there's anything that I've ever seen quite like it. And the insurance companies are going to have a big problem, because you're talking about big, big dollars.
Let's get reaction from our Washington correspondent now, Benji Haya. Benji, thank you for joining me. We just heard Ross King there before saying politics is raising its ugly head. Donald Trump's clearly not a fan of Gavin Newsom. What else has he been saying about the wildfires today?
Well, the president-elect is pinning the blame, it seems, on California's governor and his water management. Those comments that you heard just there were made as Trump visited Congress yesterday, but he's also been railing on his social media platform, Truth Social. On it, he called the wildfires, quote, the worst in the history of our country, in dollar amount, that is. That is clearly how Donald Trump is quantifying the significance. It's worth stressing it is not quite true when he says, quote, they don't have any water in LA. There have been challenges, yes, and the water supply is overwhelmed. What is interesting, perhaps, or maybe it's just predictable by this point, is what we've seen in terms of Donald Trump's approach to this tragedy. He is using it as an opportunity, as he's done in the past, to attack his political opponents. But Governor Newsom has hit back in his own way. He says that people are fleeing, people have lost lives, families torn asunder, and yet this guy, in reference to Donald Trump, wants to politicize it, says Gavin Newsom. If you are looking at who or maybe what to blame for this devastating fire, the reality is that people should look no further than some new findings that came out earlier today. Researchers at the University of California say the sort of conditions that we've seen in Los Angeles are linked to something called weather whiplash, and that is a phenomenon, as you can imagine, that is stoked by climate change.
Benji, Trump attended the funeral of Jimmy Carter earlier today. I saw him chatting away to Barack Obama, so uniting with fellow presidents. He previously said he didn't always agree with him, but America's owed Carter a debt of gratitude. Tell us more about the event that took place today.
Well, still taking place, in fact. That funeral service ongoing, and Donald Trump is present. He's sitting alongside and chatting with Barack Obama, his predecessor. Look, Donald Trump has published a gracious statement upon President Carter's death. He said that he praised him, you know, over that weekend, last year, I should say. But the president-elect also has form at mocking President Carter. He's branded him amongst the worst US presidents, those comments he repeated on Carter's 100th birthday. Today, though, we've only seen pleasantries at the memorial service. That, as I mentioned, is still taking place at Washington National Cathedral. We have heard over the past hour or so multiple eulogies from colleagues, from family of the late president, praising him, his character, his achievements. President Joe Biden has described Carter as a man of courage and compassion, and the sitting president has just spoken at that service. He said that the former president had, quote, a good life of faith, of hope and of love, saying that he'll miss the 39th president and calling on fellow Americans to pay homage to the man. This is not the end of proceedings. Following this funeral service, President Carter's remains are then going to be transported back to his hometown in the state of Georgia, and it is there where a private, intimate service will be held with his family.
Benji Haya in Washington, thank you so much for that. This week, Elon Musk has been accused of interfering in politics, from criticising the UK Prime Minister for his handling of grooming gangs to calling out the governor of California for the wildfires. And later today, the tech tycoon will sit down with Alex Weidel, head of the AfD, Germany's far-right party, ahead of the country's general election. The planned interview has been heavily criticised by European leaders, including Emmanuel Macron and the current German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. I'm now joined by AfD MEP and the party's first deputy leader in the European Parliament, Thomas Froelich. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Good to talk to you once again. Later today, Musk will be interviewing your party's leader and candidate to be Germany's Chancellor in the general elections, which are scheduled for February. What can we expect from the conversation later?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. What we can expect from the conversation, I think it will be a very informative conversation. I think the world will learn that we represent reasonable positions, that we want to preserve our identity, that we don't want to sacrifice our economy to climate ideology, and that we are just ordinary patriots and not neo-Nazis or something like this. I think this will be very important, and I think the world needs to know that we are just people, reasonable people, and I think this will be the message from the live talk between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel today.
So important to show what the party is really about. The AfD performed strongly in European Parliament elections. Macron has hit out at Musk for directly interfering in elections, as has Norway and Germany. There's growing backlash amid the Tesla chief's escalating feud with Keir Starmer in the UK. Does the AfD welcome Musk's intervention in German politics, or are we at a dangerous crossroads?
To be honest, I think we support this interference because this support, Elon Musk's support for the AfD, is a stroke of luck for us. Musk is a successful entrepreneur and he represents the future, and his support significantly boosts our standing and our image in Germany and abroad. The fact that he will now have a talk with our party leader, Alice Weidel, is, in my eyes, a sensation and something I didn't expect a few weeks ago. And to be honest, I really enjoy the panicked reaction from the left liberal establishment. Now there are talks of even stronger regulation of social networks, and Elon Musk is, as you said, accused of foreign interference. In my eyes, this is quite hypocritical, because the same people who are now outraged by Elon Musk's supposed foreign interference, they have no problem with US billionaires like George Soros sponsoring political NGOs abroad that are involved even in regime change operations. And another example, Bill Gates, he donated over 5 million euros to the German magazine Der Spiegel. And worldwide, he has donated hundreds of millions to media outlets in the US, but also abroad, to media outlets that are favorable to him. So I ask you, where was the outcry then? Where was the outcry when, for example, US President Donald Trump was banned by Twitter a few years ago? And now a few tweets from Elon Musk and a conversation between Elon Musk and Alice Weidel are considered as the end of democracy. To be honest, I think this is quite ridiculous. And I think that the left liberal establishment is afraid of freedom of speech. That's the point. Just imagine today, 150 officials of the European Union are monitoring Musk's live talk with Alice Weidel. 150 EU officials. To be honest, this is insane. Is this what the free democracy looks like? To be honest, I have my doubts.
But Thomas, let's be realistic. Musk has really been roasting European leaders on X. We've heard him call Olaf Scholz a fool. He's also called the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer evil. He's really gone for leaders. Do you think this is someone you want involved in your party moving forward? As you say, you just want to be seen as normal people.
He's a private person. He's an entrepreneur. He's not the president of the U.S. So I think he just used his right of freedom of speech, and I think this is okay. Other European leaders blamed, for example, Donald Trump, and they interfered in the election campaign in the U.S. as officials of their countries. So I think this is a different case. Elon Musk is a private person. Of course, he has a lot of influence, but I think it's not forbidden to use. It's not forbidden to use this influence. I think it's okay, and I think this is also part of free speech. Why shouldn't Elon Musk have the right to express his opinion on European politics? I think he has the same rights like ordinary people.
But we must remember that he is going to be coming into the Trump government in some position within a few days. But I just want to move on. I want to ask you, AFD has stated in its draft election manifesto that it wants to leave the EU and also the euro. Is this something the party will enact if you become the government? And is this really popular within Germany?
First of all, we want... this is just a draft, and we will hold our party congress in this weekend, and then we will decide on the program of the upcoming election. So this is not set in stone. We will see the result, and we don't want to leave the European Union. We want to reform the European Union because for the moment it's something that doesn't work. We have to be honest; it doesn't work. So we want to reform the European Union, but as I said, this is not set in stone since it is just a draft. We will decide on our program this weekend when we will have our party convention in Riesa in Eastern Germany. And for the moment, it's just we can just speculate on our party program. We will see. I don't think that we will vote for a Dexit. And I don't think that we will vote for leaving the euro in general.
Thomas Froelich, AFD MEP, I really appreciate you joining us this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Let's take a look at some of the other stories making headlines today. Lebanon's parliament has elected Army Chief Joseph On as head of state. It's thought On was the preferred candidate for Lebanon's key allies, whose support is critical after the 14-month conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. Lebanon requires significant funds for reconstruction as it rebuilds its economy and also infrastructure. Chinese authorities have moved more than 47,000 people affected by the Tibetan earthquake to shelters today as rescue teams continue to search for survivors. Many are still missing after Tuesday's 6.8 magnitude quake, which killed 126 people and injured 188 others. It's believed many who are trapped under the rubble may have died from hypothermia. Britain's Foreign Minister David Lammy has announced new sanctions to target the finances of people smugglers. The planned measures are intended to make it more difficult for criminals to profit from human trafficking. The legislation is expected to come into force within a year. Two NASA astronauts who have been stuck on the International Space Station since June last year have said they don't feel like castaways. Butch Wilmore and Sunny Williams were only meant to be in space for 8 days, but experienced several problems when their spacecraft returned to Earth without them. The astronauts told NASA leaders they would take pictures of the California wildfires when they pass over that part of the world in order to help those on the ground. And the Prince of Wales has posted a birthday message to his wife Catherine on social media as she turns 43. William called Catherine the most incredible wife and mother and said the strength she'd shown over the last year had been remarkable. The Princess returned to royal duties last month following chemotherapy treatment for cancer. It's believed 70 Palestinians have been killed and 104 injured across the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours after Israeli attacks. Now, over 800 parents to Israeli soldiers have pleaded with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to end the war. Al Arabiya has exclusively spoken to the Israeli Energy Minister Leigh Cohen, who says two things must be achieved first: the return of hostages and Hamas to leave the Gaza Strip. Take a listen.
Can you tell us when this war will end in Gaza?
When two main conditions are achieved: when the hostages are returned and when Hamas leaders lay down their weapons and leave the Gaza Strip.
You will accept that the Hamas leaders will leave Gaza and not to kill them?
Anyone who killed Israelis will be held accountable. If they want Gaza to take a new direction, they must understand two things: the hostages must be returned and Hamas must not control Gaza the day after.
Will Israel attack Iran, the nuclear program?
Israel pledges that Iran will not possess nuclear weapons. I believe that an international coalition led by the United States must act against Iran, and if they do not, Israel will. Ultimately, Iran is a country that denies human rights to its people.
You already attacked in Iran. You can repeat that?
We have proven that we can reach any location in the Middle East, even over 2,000 kilometers away from Israel, with accurate intelligence and significant capabilities. Preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons is not only in Israel's interest, but also in the interest of the world and the entire region. I'm fully aware of what the Islamic countries surrounding Iran think. I am in contact with my colleagues, the foreign ministers. They are wary of Iran.
You mean Bahrain and UAE?
I won't mention specific names, but all Islamic countries surrounding Iran want Israel to win its war against the Muslim Brotherhood, and in its confrontation with Iran. This is what all countries want. Israel is the only country capable of acting and fighting. This is an international and regional interest. Our vision for the future includes the resumption of peace agreements, such as the Abraham Accords with the UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. We see tourism flourishing between these countries, trade agreements being signed, cooperation increasing, and regional stability strengthening.
But it's going slow because of the war in Gaza.
We think that the relationship is ongoing and continuous. I believe that Trump's era will be a time of clarity in addressing Iran. It will be a time when regional stability could advance and peace agreements could be expanded.
And you can watch the full interview with Israel's Energy Minister Leigh Cohen on Al Arabiya on Friday. Let's take a look at the top business news. The pound has fallen to its lowest level in over a year, while borrowing costs have surged to their highest for 16 years. Economists have warned soaring costs could lead to further tax rises or cuts to spending plans in the UK. In response to an urgent question in the Commons, Treasury Minister Darren Jones said there would be no need for an emergency intervention in financial markets. China's betting on kitchen appliances to boost the flagging economy. The government has expanded a list of products including microwaves and rice cookers that people can trade in to get a discount of as much as 20% on new goods. The world's second largest economy has been facing several challenges, including weak consumer demand and deepening property crisis. Let's go to sport now, and Sean Dyche has been sacked by Everton Football Club hours before they play Peterborough in the FA Cup third round. The club's under-18 coach Leighton Baines and defender Seamus Coleman will be in charge for tonight's game. Jose Mourinho is rumoured as a replacement for Dyche, as well as David Moyes, who left West Ham back in the summer. In addition, West Ham have named a former Chelsea manager Graham Potter as their new head coach. He will replace Julian Lopetegui on a 2.5-year contract. Lopetegui was sacked after poor performances and heavy losses for the East London Football Club. West Ham are down to 14th place in the Premier League. Former Australian captain Steve Smith will lead the side in their upcoming Test series against Sri Lanka as Pat Cummins takes paternity leave. Smith previously served a 2-year ban from captaincy following his involvement in the 2018 ball tampering scandal. Seam bowler Josh Hazlewood will also be missing from the side as he recovers from a calf injury. A reminder of our top stories today. Wildfires continue to rip through Los Angeles with almost 180,000 people under evacuation orders and iconic landmarks damaged. The funeral of the 39th President, Jimmy Carter, has taken place in Washington, attended by all 5 living US presidents. Elon Musk prepares for a sit-down interview with Germany's right-wing AfD party leader, with European leaders calling it intrusive and pretentious. And when will the war in Gaza end? Al Arabiya asks Israel's energy minister Eli Cohen, who does provide 2 conditions. And that's all from us on W News. Thank you for joining us. Riz Khan is coming up next. And don't miss Tom Burges Watson with GNT. Good night.
At Al Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Al Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome to Al Arabiya News. I'm your host, Micheál Prendergast. I'm thrilled to say I'm joined by the star of Shark Tank USA and millionaire investor, Kevin O'Leary. So Kevin, the world has been shocked about the return of Donald Trump. Are you shocked?
No. The Democratic Party lost its way. They're no longer in touch with the electorate. There was a certain arrogance they had, and I think the problem started when Biden left the ticket, because in the democratic process, usually you have a convention, and so you start from scratch, and that process weeds out any weakness in candidates. If they have an inability to articulate their position, for example, or they're not able to debate their colleagues or whatever. But the other advantage of the convention, and there's been many very famous conventions back as far as the 40s, 50s, and 60s, is that the party realigns itself with a new message, because it's trying to figure out what's the best candidate for the times. And they also get a tremendous amount of press, almost 5-6 weeks of press. That's not what happened here. What occurred was, I don't know if you want to call them the party elite, but the Pelosi's, the Schumers, the Obama,
the deep
even
state,
some movie stars, you know, they said, well, we're going to anoint Harris. And that was a mistake, because Harris, well, a very fine person, I'm sure, has never won anything. And last time she tried this, she didn't get a single delegate. So in 2020, in 2019 she failed, 2020 she failed again in 2024. The analogy I think that is best serving this thing is the Super Bowl of all political contests on earth is the American presidential election. There's no greater political event on earth. And if your quarterback gets injured, which is what Biden was, you don't put in a new quarterback that's never played a game, ever won one, ever. They got shellacked, and they've learned an important lesson. I looked at that map, the electoral map, while covering the election. It was turning redder than a lobster being boiled. I mean, he just took the nation. And I think they're doing a little soul searching now. But they had it coming to them. And as I like to say, Trump did them a huge favor. He actually helped that party. They don't know it yet, but they're going to have to take a spatula to it and scrape all of those candidates away and start from scratch with new leadership. They'll be a very competitive party. There's a lot of talent in the Democratic Party that never got a chance to compete. Now they will.
Yeah, and speaking of Donald Trump, I've heard you say every Democrat has to thank him for saving American entrepreneurship and the American economy.
Yeah, the concept, some of the ideas being proposed, specifically taxing unrealized gains, that's un-American. The idea of price controls, Soviet-style price controls, that's un-American. The focus on gender identity was not the #1 concern of people that can't even afford chicken on their kitchen table. So when you get that lost, the system corrects itself, and that's exactly what happened. That's the amazing thing about democracy. When you try and stretch it too far in any direction, boom, it self-corrects. Now, you happen to be in the way of the self-correction, you get decimated, and that's what happened to that party.
Yes, and the effect of social media has been really interesting. Obviously, Elon Musk has played a huge part. Obviously, he paid $44 billion. Do you see that as a good investment in the future of free speech?
Well, as an investment, it wasn't a good investment because it's valued now at $11 to $12 billion. But that doesn't matter. What he did do is keep alive the concept of free speech, because in a democracy, you're always dealing with 2.5% lunatic fringe. The cost of freedom of speech is the lunatic fringe. The minute you try and shut down the lunatic fringe, you're moving away from the concept freedom of speech. Everybody has a voice. You may not like what they say, but because they're part of the narrative, that is the core and the DNA of democracy. And so many ideas get tested, some get thrown out. And when you try and change that, again, the system self-corrects, and that's what happened here. So it's a very divided country now. We are going to have a new president with a full mandate. I mean, it looks like he's going to win the Senate and the House and the presidency. You can get a lot done for the first 2 years when you control everything. And so that's what's going to happen.
And obviously Trump in his first 4 years, it might have been called a little inexperienced. I think this time he won't mess around.
Well, he's actually signaled the market that he intends to hire seasoned veterans, AAA players, that don't have a mandate to go in the White House and write a book 6 weeks later after they're fired. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want a rotating door anymore. He wants A players, and he's grooming his... he's got some very interesting people working on the inside to find the right people for every single position in cabinet. And I think it's going to be a fantastic government, because it's going to focus on what the people want. They want security at the border. They've already said that. They want a reduction in inflation. The way you do that is you reduce energy costs. They want to strip away all the regulatory environment that the Biden administration put on. $1 trillion worth of burdensome regulation. He will tear that off like a Band-Aid, rip it right off, and the economy, as you can see, indexed by the market, the buoyancy that happened as soon as they figured out that he was going to be president, was pretty happy with that outcome. This is good for business. And when the economy is buoyant and people are getting employed, it's good for everybody. So, you know, the Democrats are licking their wounds, but in 6 weeks, everybody forget about it, and we'll move on. It'll be a great thing for everybody. I think the U.S. is in a renaissance period. And I'm not really shilling for politicians. I never do that. I shill for policy. I care about policy. I care about entrepreneurship. I care about investing. I care about the American dream. I'm an ambassador for it. I want that to work because my family, you know, is American and they're working in the U.S. I want the best we can get for that country every day. And this is how you do it.
And speaking in terms of efficiency, Elon Musk has famously, he sacked or he got rid of 85% of Twitter, and it's still running pretty flawlessly. There's been a lot of speculation that he might get the Secretary of State for Government Efficiency. Would you like to see that? What could someone like Elon Musk do in terms of saving tax dollars?
I don't think he'll take an actual specific role in cabinet. I think what he will do is be a consultant for the American people, identify inefficiencies, and get the whacking stick out. I love that idea. I love the idea that we've never really scraped the fat out of the federal government, and it's big, porky, fat, dripping with opportunity to cut. But the only way you can do that is you need a mandate from the top dog, the president, because no agency wants to be downsized. You walk in saying, I want to fire a third of you. They're not going to help you. But he'll identify opportunity. I call it release the hounds. Because what taxpayer, regardless of what your politics are, red or blue or independent, who wouldn't want to save money by just chopping out all the waste in the federal government? And I think if there's one man that has the ability to do that, proven executional skills, it's Elon Musk. So I really endorse this idea.
Well, I think it could be a great team, obviously, with Donald Trump and the art of the deal. To speak on the international scale, with tariffs, obviously it's a word that Trump has bandied around a lot. What does that mean for, I suppose, the average Joe in America and for the future of international trade? We're looking at China, we're looking at EV production. What do Trump's tariffs mean?
So tariffs were used as a form of rhetoric, weaponry during the election cycle. Harris called them sales tax, like a VAT tax that we have in Europe. That's not what they are. In fact, there's a bill cruising around the Hill right now in the U.S. It's a tariff reciprocal act. And what it says is any of our trading partners that impose tariffs will put a reciprocal, identical tariff. So if Germany puts 10% on cars, we'll put 10% on their cars coming to the U.S., that kind of thing. And of course, you know, there's a new act, the new NAFTA 2.0, if you want to call it that governs Canada, the United States, and Mexico, big trading partners. The one entity that I think you're going to see a lot more pressure on is China. China doesn't abide by the rules of the WTO. They joined in 1999 with all kinds of promises to play by the rules. They never did. So I'm an advocate for using tariffs to squeeze their heads like teenage pimples. And the way I make that is, point that out, is to say, look, the only way a supreme leader stays in power perpetually is everybody has bread and butter. You have to have a job. Otherwise, you ride against the supreme leader. And that's just the way it is in a communist dictatorship. So the way you squeeze the supreme leader's head is you say, look, let's pick a sector. I'm just going to use an example. Yoga mats. Let's say the U.S. orders 1 million yoga mats a week from China. You put a 400% tariff on it. And all the people making yoga mats in China lose their jobs. And they don't have any bread and butter anymore. And the supreme leader goes, oh my goodness, I don't have any jobs for these yoga mat makers. And then you say, well, where else can we inflict some damage? Let's do it in this sector. Put on 400% tariff there, squeezing that teenage pimple till it pops. Then he gets on an airplane and flies to Washington saying, just kidding, I want to work out and be part of the, reciprocal tariff act. Because China only understands the stick. They don't understand anything else.
It's a game of chicken.
Well, Trump scares his adversaries because he's unpredictable. He's just very unpredictable. When you know what your adversary is going to do all the time and they signal it to you beforehand, you're not scared of him anymore. They're scared shitless of Trump. And that's, excuse my French, but that's basically how it works. That's why you're seeing all these guys saying, oh, we want to have peace now. Now we want to stop. I mean, because he's very unpredictable. So in the case of China, squeezing the supreme leader to the table is a good thing. So I would like to go to 400% tariffs. Because I do business in China. They don't play by the rules.
And how about on EVs? Because obviously, even a 20% or even a 30% tariff on EVs, I believe in the EU, they're trying to flood the market. Obviously, Germany's not happened. We've seen Volkswagen cut 1,000 jobs in 2 months ago.
The point is, tariffs are temporary. They're a negotiating tactic. But if you're going to put them on, don't screw around. Go to 400%. Make it impossible for them to sell any widgets anywhere. So if you put 400% on an EV, no one's going to buy it. Only the Chinese can buy it. So all the people making the EVs, no bread, no butter. That's how you do it. Now, if I was the minister of Chinese head squeezing, that's how I would do it. And believe me, they will be at the table so fast because they cannot afford to have unemployment in that economy. And it's showing some cracks there. So you want to hit them while they're down and bring them to the table. They cheat on IP, they steal, you can't use their courts. A good example that people should focus on is Twitter, or not Twitter, but TikTok. TikTok has been deemed Chinese spyware by the American Congress. That's a bipartisan bill. By midnight on Jan 19th in the US, the servers are going to get turned off.
I've heard you say as well that you would like to buy it,
I would.
a consortium. Do you want to buy Twitter?
Yeah,
TikTok?
I would definitely buy TikTok. I would buy it because it's a great, it depends what I get with it. If I don't get the algorithm, all I'm getting is a mailing list, so I pay a lot less for that. But we'll see how this goes because, remember, they did this in India. After 4 years, they had 200 million users on it, and the supreme leader would not, play by the rules with the Indian government, and they said, we'll just turn it off. And everybody was squeamish for a week, and then they forgot about it. They just drifted onto other social media platforms. So again, squeezing the supreme leader's head there is good. And it is spyware. I would never put that on a phone that I have sensitive data on. It's Chinese spyware. Everybody knows that. That's why it's shut down. They just shut it down in Canada. I mean, they're going to shut it down everywhere. But this is the arrogance of the supreme leader. He doesn't care. So you've got to squeeze his head. He will appreciate the head squeezing. He will thank you for it.
And is it the same, obviously, with the likes of Vladimir Putin and the war between Israel and Hamas? War is not good for business. Do you think Trump is going to have a large enough impact? He said famously, I will stop the wars within the first day of office. Do you think that's true?
Putin understands force. Not a very nice guy. He's killed a lot of people. But 25,000 young Russians a month lose their lives. He's buying their services now. There's no more patriots left. You get coffin money, your family gets a house, but you go die or get blown up. That's pretty brutal. So I would think giving him a call and saying, look, I've been thinking about this war. I don't like it. I don't want to pay for the Ukrainian costs, and I want it to stop. Come to the table, or I'll do something that will really surprise you, which is probably what people worry about with Trump, because we saw how he ended the Syrian conflict by just saying, I'm going to kill this guy. And he did. And I think that kind of erratic nature is what these adversaries worry about. Now, a lot of NATO players don't like to hear this, but I think war's horrible. I think all these people and children losing their lives is horrible. It's just, somebody has to stop this.
Exactly, and on a human level, but as well as
obviously
markets. So it affects the bread and butter as well. So you're taking food off of people's tables, affecting jobs, as well as the human suffering. It's bad all around.
It is. So I think people are willing to try a different way. Now, whether Trump's successful or not, we'll see. But this carnage of death of young children, I can't watch it anymore. No one can.
Of course.
It's got to stop.
Then, moving on to cryptocurrency, we've seen markets as well as the price of Bitcoin increase. It broke $72,000, I believe, in the past few days. Do you believe under Trump, what is the height that you think it can get to under a Trump presidency?
So Trump has signaled, and the market knows this, that he is in favor of digital payment system, which includes Bitcoin, which is an asset class I'm not saying that's a digital payment system, but it's no different than gold. I mean, you can own some gold, you can own some Bitcoin. I own both. What the problem is, we don't have institutional support for it yet because it's not regulated in the U.S. The way other commodities are. So the rumor on the street is that the CFTC, which regulates commodities, is going to get the mandate for crypto, and they're looking for someone to run it. And they'll probably take a lot of that away from Gensler at the SEC, who's been litigating this sector, and successfully, I might add. He's, all the crypto cowboys, like Binance, CZ, he's a felon now. You know what happened to Sam Bankman-Fried. So people that took on Gensler all lost. And this is probably a good thing, so we move into a phase now where it's going to be regulated. There's a lot of optimism about it. Here in Abu Dhabi, we have the M2 exchange, which is a very interesting idea because it's completely compliant with its regulator. I see a lot of upside coming in crypto.
And a figure, just briefly, do you think, what's the limit? Do you think it can reach 200K under a Trump presidency?
I think we'll all see 100,000 shortly. I feel everybody should have 5% weighting in gold in their portfolio. Nothing wrong with 5% weighting in Bitcoin. I mean, why not? I mean, unless you really think, and you don't have to do this, I'm just saying alternative asset classes in times of uncertainty and inflation are good. I mean, I own gold and I've had it my whole life. I was given a locket from my Irish father when I was 11 years old that had a gold coin in it. That's when I fell in love with it. I've had that ever since. And I own bullion, I own ETFs. I mean, gold is gold. The Romans loved it, I love it. Bitcoin is the new. It's not as old as gold, but it's performed very well for me.
Yeah. And just lastly, speaking on gold, obviously to have Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful in the studio, it would be a shame if I didn't ask about watches. You are, I would say, the most famous watch collector in the world now, doing millions of views on YouTube every month with the likes of Teddy Baldassar. He has just opened his new watch shop. I want to ask you, would you ever think of entering the watch strap business? The red bands are synonymous
it's
with you.
It's a great question, but what I've learned about watch collecting and getting access, I mean, the thing that in my journey into horology is, in order to get watchmakers that are really unique, who make only a few pieces a year, you need to be known as a collector. And what does that mean? It means that you support the art. It's no different than contemporary art. And you don't flip them. So flipping a watch, when you get a reputation for buying it at the entry price from the watchmaker and then turning around and selling it for 4 times that the next week, you're not a collector. You're just a flipper. And the watch community is very small. In terms of the makers, there's probably 25 makers of consequence worldwide. The word gets out overnight that you're not a real collector. And so it takes a long time to earn the trust of an F.P. Journe or a Simon Britt or any of these makers. And I'm known I've never sold a watch. And so I have a very vast collection, and I'm a dial guy, as you know. So I'm always looking for the new dial. I'm wearing a Moser, a unique dial here. And of course, this is a classic Daytona. I thought, this is New York time, this is Abu Dhabi time. And so I support. The thing about getting into the business of retailing watches or retailing bands is all of a sudden...
I'd buy it, Kevin.
Yeah, no, I'm
100%.
You're no longer
I'll pay a penny for an O'Leary band.
But I'm very fortunate. Every watch company knows I won't wear it unless it has a red band. So they don't even offer me watches if they can't put a red band on. I would never buy them. So my whole thing's red band because it looks fantastic. Great with gold, great with platinum. I mean, this looks gorgeous. Works with my red.
Of course.
I just wonder if
on Shark Tank.
Yeah, the whole thing is, it's just over the years it's become one of my things. But each maker, watches are really a beautiful thing because they mark a period in your life. Every time I do a big deal, I buy a new watch. And I associate that deal with that watch. And, my daughters try and steal them, my wife, my son. Nobody gets to touch my watches. Like, that's it. That's the one thing that I've got. They're in vaults all around the world, and I just love it. I just have so much fun. And the reason I like it is the community of watch collectors that I know all around the world are very eclectic. Surgeons, artists, financiers, royalty, you name it. And we
journalists?
Yes, journalists. We share the passion of watches, and I think it enriches my life.
Great. Kevin O'Leary, a millionaire investor, host of the Smash Hit Show at Shark Tank. Thank you so much for your time.
You got it. Thank you.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News,
It's very impressive.
where knowledge meets perspective.
Hello and welcome. I'm Riz Khan. While the world leaders debate the future state of the oceans during the latest COP event in Azerbaijan, my guest on this episode is a remarkable young man who's already making a major positive impact on the ocean environment. The Dutch entrepreneur Boyan Slat has been a CEO for over a decade. He's devoted more than half of his life to saving the planet from plastic, and yet he only recently reached the age of 30. Boyan's non-profit company, Ocean Cleanup, has been on an ambitious mission to rid the seas and rivers of plastic since 2013. It has invented technology that's transforming the pollution of our seas and rivers, and its work is saving wildlife, fisheries, tourism, and economies. Ocean Cleanup is also preventing plastic from entering the food chain and ultimately ending up on our own plates.
We can clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 10 years' time at a cost of $7.5 billion. So that's less than half of what America is spending on Halloween decorations on an annual basis.
In a wide-ranging conversation, we discussed how achievable Boyan's mission is today. Plus, I got a glimpse inside the mind of a driven and determined young innovator who entered the record books at just 14 after experimenting with rockets and explosives. Boyan, great to have a chance to have a chat. Now, many would argue you can't put a price on having clean oceans, but you've effectively done just that. You recently revealed your assessment of how long it will take to complete your mission to remove plastic from the seas and how much it will cost. Now, people might be surprised by the numbers, so tell me what you know.
Sure, yeah. So at the current level of performance, so basically what we have already achieved to date, we can clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch in 10 years' time at a cost of $7.5 billion. So that's less than half of what America is spending on Halloween decorations on an annual basis. Now, so I think, it's compared to a world problem, it's something that we should be able to afford. However, we're also looking to do it even faster and even cheaper. So by improving the way we detect where the highest concentrations of plastic are inside of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, we think we can actually do it in just 5 years' time at a cost of $4 billion. So yeah, really now for the first time ever, we know what it will take to return the Pacific Ocean to its clean and pristine state.
That's a fascinating comparison, literally half of Halloween decorations in the US. Yep. But give me this perspective, because there are always skeptics out there. Why do you see this as value for money? What else could you get for that amount?
Yeah, so I think it's important to put it in the context of not cleaning the ocean, right? And according to a study done by Deloitte a couple of years ago, the plastic pollution problem as a whole is costing humanity up to $19 billion per year. And if you take into account all the ecosystem services that the ocean is providing, you're actually looking north of $500 billion in terms of harm that the pollution is doing to our ocean every year. So if you think in terms of ROI, it's way cheaper to clean the ocean than to not clean the ocean.
Let me ask you about this, because obviously there's a trail involved. How does plastic get from the factory to the ocean?
Yes, every year humanity uses roughly 400 million tons of plastic per year. during its use, it's providing a lot of value to humanity. It's a versatile material. It's an energy efficient material as well. But unfortunately, not all of that plastic gets collected and processed in a responsible way. So you'll have essentially leakage from the system, and some of that plastic is able to end up in our waterways, so in rivers in particular. And through rivers, it then ends up in the ocean. So, and we're talking about quite a small fraction. So less than 0.5% of the plastic that's being used ends up in rivers and flows into the ocean. But of course, that 0.5% is able to do a tremendous amount of harm to the environment, to coastal economies, and also to humanity in terms of the potential health risks of that plastic ending up in our food chain.
Isn't that amazing? It's such a small percentage, yet so important. We'll talk more about the important role of rivers in transporting plastic waste to the sea. Give us some idea of what happens when it gets there.
So once plastic is in the ocean, actually most of it only stays in the ocean for a relatively short time. So the majority will end up back on shore, on coastlines, washes up in a matter of weeks to months. And of course, that's still not a good thing, right? Because it damages tourism. Coastlines are also important ecosystems. But effectively, most of it removes itself from the ocean in a relatively short amount of time. But some plastic is able to make its way all the way to the open ocean, where if it does, it will end up in one of the 5 gyres. So that's an area where ocean currents converge, where plastic can enter, but it can never leave. And out of those 5 oceanic gyres that exist on Earth, the largest one is in the North Pacific, and that's also the most polluted one. So more than half of the world's plastic pollution that's stuck in the ocean can be found in that one, and that's of course the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
Plastic accumulates in huge subtropic oceanic areas called gyres. Massive circular currents that trap the plastic for decades, if not centuries. There are 5 gyres in our oceans. The most polluted and best studied is the infamous Great Pacific Garbage Patch, located in the North Pacific Ocean between Hawaii and California.
It's interesting, Sarge, explain for our viewers, gyre you mean by almost like a gyroscopic swirl of water, and the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is something that I remember discussing years ago. What is it? What would you want people to know about that, and what do you remember about encountering it for the first time?
Yeah, so it's so if we take the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is the largest accumulation of trash on Earth, this is an area that spans an area 3 times the size of France. It contains more than 100 million kilos of plastic. And what's really fascinating is when we take that plastic out and we look at the age of the plastic, we see that a lot of it is actually very old plastic, because again, once it's there to stay. It's stuck indefinitely until of course, it ends up in the stomach of a fish or whatnot. But in principle, it's there to stay for a very long time. So we even see stuff dating back to the 1960s that are still. We even had a Vietnam War drinking bottle from the U.S. Army that we found in still recognizable shape, still floating around out there in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So that really goes to show that why we have to go out there and clean it up. Sure, of course, it's essential to prevent more plastic from entering the ocean. But if that's the only thing we do, the ocean will be polluted forever, because those ocean garbage patches, they persist, and that's why I have to go out and clean this up.
Let's go back to rivers, and you'd mentioned a little bit about rivers playing, in terms of small percentage, but quite a high role, or quite an important role in all this. What are the numbers we should know about the pollution in the rivers?
Yeah. So firstly, again, it's just a very small fraction of all the world's plastic that is being consumed that ends up in the ocean. And what's also fascinating is that those emissions are very concentrated in really just a small fraction of the world's rivers. So what we found in a study we published a few years ago is that just 1% of the world's rivers is responsible for roughly 80% of all the plastic that ends up in the ocean. So with a relatively sort of targeted intervention, intercepting the plastic in those 1% of the world's rivers, we can really stop most of the world's plastic emissions from polluting the ocean. Now, that 1% still accounts for 1,000 rivers, right? So it's still a big scope, but the good thing is that they are concentrated in a relatively small number of coastal cities, especially in middle-income countries. So Southeast Asia, West Africa, Latin America. Those are really the plastic pollution hotspots. So those are countries where there's now enough wealth to consume a lot of packaged goods wrapped in plastic. So you have a lot of waste generation, but where the infrastructure to then take care of that waste is really lacking. And just to give some more color to that, there's one river in Guatemala that we're operating in, where that one river is actually responsible for more plastic emissions to the oceans than all the developed countries combined. Just one river. So that's why we focus our work in those places where the problem is biggest and where we can have essentially the biggest bang for our buck.
Boyan's interest, you could say obsession, with plastic waste in the seas was famously triggered by a scuba diving trip to Greece as a teenager. You'll know the expression, "I can't see the wood for the trees." Well, Boyan couldn't see the fish for the plastic bags, but he could see a problem and he had a vision to solve it. But his problem-solving appetite had begun at an even earlier age. I'd like to roll back the years and talk about the start of your incredible journey as someone who seemed, well, I guess, incredibly curious, driven and determined from a very early age. Your explorations involved explosives, launching rockets. At one point, you almost burnt down your family home.
Correct. Yeah. My mom didn't particularly like that phase. But yeah, I've always been very fascinated about technology and making things, building things, and so I've never been bored as a child, and always had my projects, right? So I had my own chemistry experiments, built my own computers. Actually, going all the way back, when I was 2, I used some wood and a hammer and nails to make my own chair. So always been had this urge to build and create. Indeed, when I was 12 or 13, I was really into some model rockets, and I decided to set a Guinness World Record by launching more than 200 of them at the same time. Again, not very useful, but it was just the way I kept myself busy. And sort of asking myself a question, what if I could do this? Could I have this idea? Could I make that happen? That's probably the thing I've always asked myself throughout my childhood, and it's also the type of question that I asked myself when I was 16 years old. When scuba diving in Greece, came across more plastic bags than fish, and I asked myself, why can't I clean this up? So I kind of see this as a continuation of my childhood.
Now, Boyan, a key moment in your journey was a TED Talk in which you laid out your ideas and it went viral. Tell me about that feedback you had from that TED Talk and the realization that there were people out there who did share your passion.
So please, don't tell me we can't clean this up together. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so at the time when I did that presentation, I was studying aerospace engineering at university here, and I had this idea. I had the opportunity to present that idea, this TEDx presentation, And a few months passed and there wasn't really any traction. And at that point in time, I actually thought like, okay, to give this idea any chance of success, I should probably drop out of university, dedicate all my time to this. And then again, few tough months followed. I approached 300 companies for help and sponsorship, and only one replied. And that person said, "This is a terrible idea. You should go back to school." So that was hard. But then suddenly there was some news blog that picked up the story, embedded the video of my presentation, and suddenly this blew up. And within no time, this video was watched, I think, over 1 million times, and that then allowed me to assemble an initial team, back then still volunteers, and also run a crowdfunding campaign to get the seed money to get started.
That crowdfunding campaign raised a staggering $2 million, with tens of thousands of donations from more than 150 countries. Ocean Cleanup was launched, but it would have to navigate through stormy weather on its voyage to save the seas.
It took us 8 years to finally have a system that worked. And throughout that time, we've had so many near-death experiences of almost running out of money, systems that broke down. I think we've done a few hundred prototype tests until we had something that worked. So it's so I remember vividly. We launched that new system. It was summer 2021. We deployed in the patch, and actually the first tests, they didn't look very good. We were only collecting like a very small pile of trash, and it was just another one of those moments like where did we mess up? Why is it not working again this time? And then a few days later we deployed the system again. We took the system back on deck. We emptied it out, and there was just this. So I woke up in the morning and I opened my phone and I see all these missed message calls and text messages. And I opened up my phone and I saw this photo of this massive mountain of plastic on deck. And that's definitely one of the biggest highlights. It's like almost like all of the pain of the 8 years was made it worth it for that brief moment when we finally knew we had a system that worked and that we could clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And by the way, it just turned out that we were in essentially sort of an empty part of the garbage patch in those first days. So we were essentially being fooled by the density of plastic. So that was a tremendous relief. And then of course we just got better and better to now the point that we can actually get the job done in just a couple of years' time.
I know you've been constantly working to improve your cleanup operation. I wonder how effective is the current system you have in contrast to your early attempts?
Yeah, so it's been a long journey to get to this point. It was 2018 when we launched our first system, which firstly didn't collect plastic, which is quite an important requirement for an ocean cleanup system. It also broke into two, which again was sort of, as we like to refer to it, as an unscheduled learning opportunity. So we learned a lot from those early days, early failures. But now fast forward to today, we have this massive 1.5 mile long cleanup system with which we can actually clean an area the size of a football field every 5 seconds. So it is, tremendously effective. Now it's really about scaling it up. So we know it can be done. We have now given humans the tool we need to clean it up. But now it's really about who is willing to make it happen and fund the expansion to a whole fleet of systems with which we then are able to clean up the whole ocean.
That's fascinating, Boy. And so literally a football pitch in 5 seconds. But I guess when you're talking of a patch 3 times the size of France, that's a lot of football pitches.
Yes, yeah, exactly. We've had one system out there for the past 3 years doing all the testing and development work. And in that time, we've swept an area roughly the size of New Jersey. So it does add up over time, of course. But to really clean up the ocean in 5 years' time, what you're going to need is a fleet of systems, roughly 20 of them. Which is, and then once you have that, you can actually clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch.
I was blown away by when you said you'd found literally kind of old plastic, such as I think you said a plastic bottle from the Vietnam War in the garbage patch. So I wonder, what are some of the strangest things your team has recovered from the ocean?
Yeah, it's looking at our trash, it's like modern day archaeology. It's always super interesting to see what we collect. We also post these on our social media, so definitely recommend to check that out. But it's everything. It's stuff ranging from mannequins to golf balls to astroturf, plastic toys, dolls' houses. It's wild to see what's out there.
It might seem likely that local and national governments would support efforts towards cleaner rivers, beaches and fisheries, but it's not always the case. What about the business world or plastic manufacturers? And what role do we have as consumers? I wanted to find out who's helping the Ocean Cleanup Project and who's not.
So when it comes to these ocean garbage patches, the issue is that it's international waters. What's interesting is that, for example, if you look at the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, we are able to link the plastic to the 5 big industrialized countries in the North Pacific. So I think there is a case to be made that they should step up and take at least some responsibility for this. When it comes to rivers, so what we do there is we put systems in those most polluting rivers to catch it before it can reach the ocean. We're currently already stopping about 2% of the emissions. We are in 16 rivers around the world and in 8 countries. But doing those first projects, it does take time to build up those relationships with governments. And I must say, I've never really felt an unwillingness to support. Governments recognize that there is this problem, and they welcome the collaboration, and we support them. And in many places, they actually operate the interceptor, so that makes it financially sustainable on the long term as well. Right. But governments are just large and bureaucratic, so they are quite slow generally, right? So getting the permits to deploy, getting the contract secured, that usually is the limiting factor in how fast we can roll out our interceptor projects.
And yet it's an international problem. So how are global institutions like the United Nations helping you tackle it?
So we do have a partnership with the United Nations Development Program, who help open doors with those national governments. I think what's quite interesting, of course, we would welcome the support of the UN. And I think especially when you talk about the ocean garbage patches, it is an international problem, and this waste just travels through many different countries and their waters, right? But what's interesting about the river problem is that you don't need any altruism, or you don't need any international cooperation to get this done, because actually, the biggest victim of the pollution that flows out of Indonesia's rivers is Indonesia, right? And the biggest victim of Panama's pollution is Panama, because most of that trash will stay in those coastal waters, will wash up on shore, and therefore there's just a selfish economic reason for these countries to step up and intercept that plastic before it goes into the ocean, which I think is a good thing, because international cooperation is notoriously difficult. So I do expect governments to be much faster in adopting what we do in rivers than international waters.
Boyan, how about a little finger pointing here? How about the business world? Are the plastic manufacturers searching for solutions, or are they actually continuing to add to the problem they helped to create?
Yeah, well, at the Ocean Cleanup, we are about solutions. We don't point fingers. But at the same time, I think, be it governments, be it plastic producers, be it the companies that use the plastic that produce the packaging, the Coca-Colas of this world, and even the users of the plastic. I think everyone has played a role in creating this problem, and therefore I think everyone also should have the opportunity to really be part of the solution. So, I think if there's any industry that has benefited from all this cheap plastic and the production of it, they are the plastic producers and the companies that use it, and therefore I do think they should play a very big role in making this cleanup happen. And actually, the interesting thing is the cost of cleaning up the world's oceans is less than 1% of the net profits of the world's plastic producing companies over the course of the cleanup. So there's no doubt that they should be able to afford it. I think it's really about, are they willing to step up and grab this opportunity?
It's interesting, yeah. It's, I guess, a very good approach not to point fingers, because you want to coerce them, or at least to convince them to come on board. Now, I was going to say, on the other hand, there is that opportunity for green investment and sponsorship, and saving the planet can be seen as a cool thing for a business to be doing. So how well are you benefiting from that?
Yeah, no, exactly. I think, if you forcing people to do things is generally not a very successful strategy. Indeed, I'd like to turn it around and say, this is like an Apollo project for Earth, right? This is something that in 50 years from now, children will be learning about in school, and they will be learning who helped make this thing happen. So I think it's it's something you should want to be part of. It's like extremely exciting adventure, and I think there's a huge reputational and also litigation risk associated with this problem. We're learning more and more every day about the health impacts that this plastic in the environment is doing. There is the harm it's doing to countries and ecosystems. I think if these companies want to be ahead of that game, I think they should have an interest in this problem, that this problem goes away. And at least I can't think of any sort of faster and cheaper way to make the problem go away than by intercepting this plastic in rivers to prevent it from going into the ocean, and by cleaning up the legacy pollution that's already in the ocean garbage patches.
And what's really nice, Boyan, is that it's not just a Western lens that's on this. I gather Kia, the car manufacturer, South Korean, is one of those that's very keen to get involved.
That's right, yeah. So we're very proud that Kia is actually one of the first companies that have stepped up, and with whom we have a partnership of significant size, where, of course, they contribute financially to enabling our work, but they also get access to the plastic we take out of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So there is actually some of this plastic will find its way back into the electric cars that Kia is producing. It's in our interest that our plastic doesn't. There's no risk that this stuff ends up back in the environment. So we want this to go into durable, sustainable products. And I think the Kia partnership is a great example of that. And another one is that we recently announced that the next vinyl record that Coldplay is releasing, that there will be an edition of that record that is made out of the plastic that we've taken out of rivers. So I think that's another sort of cool aspect of what we do, and it also allows us to for this story to reach more and more people.
I was wondering about that. Well, you know, now you collected all that rubbish. What are you going to do, and how much economic value is there from recycling? And of course, I think Coldplay's been a big supporter for quite a while now as well, haven't they? And I gather you're making sunglasses, rather expensive sunglasses too.
Yeah, so we made these actually as a proof of concept. So this is 100% made out of the plastic we've collected from the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Now we're not a sunglass company, right? So for us, it was really to prove to people that this is not rubbish. You know, this is something you can actually make beautiful, useful things out of. Yeah, of course, you know, it's the economics of recycling generally are very challenging, right? It's because plastic is so cheap. It's very often cheaper to make stuff out of new plastic rather than reuse the plastic that already exists. However, of course, the thing that we add to the materials is the story value. So, you know, Kia is willing to pay, you know, the millions for that plastic, not because they are in need of plastic, but because they want to be able to tell that story when they, you know, sell their electric cars, right? So it's so that way we think it does provide an extra way for companies that join our mission to talk about what they do with the ocean cleanup.
And it's a very powerful way as well. Now, let's ask you how we as individuals could be involved. What should we be doing to help resolve the plastic problem? Yeah, well,
I think it depends on where you live on Earth. So I think if you live in a sort of middle-income country, you know, the issue is that, you know, waste collection is limited, and where the waste goes sometimes are illegal dumps, right? So, but it's, of course, it's very hard to do something about that as an individual. But of course, you can, you know, make sure that at least you pay for the waste collection and that your waste gets collected rather than, you know, that you have to dump it. I think in richer countries, it's just, there's not, you know, the risk that your plastic ends up in the environment, as long as you don't litter, is just so tiny that, you know, that basically the best thing you can do is actually support, you know, organizations like the Ocean Cleanup to, you know, to address those interventions to the places where the problem actually is happening.
The Ocean Cleanup team has encountered plenty of doubters, skeptics and critics over the years, as well as praise and prizes for its work. I was keen to know what Boyan had taken on board from that feedback and how his current work may influence his future direction as he considers looking ahead to his role as a global influencer. I understand you receive a lot of messages from schools and individuals around the world. So tell me about some of those messages that might have moved you or inspired you.
It's been humbling to receive the amount of support we've received, of course, ranging from, you know, big corporations and billionaires that give us funding all the way to school children that write letters to us. And I think, you know, I'm a big believer in that when it comes to environmental problems in general, we're going to get out of this not by, you know, protesting or fighting against modernity, you know, being against technology or business, etc., but rather to, you know, to create solutions through which humanity can, you know, fulfill its needs and desires without having the negative side effects of you know, destroying the environment. So, you know, I'm pro-environment, but I'm also pro-human, and I think if you're not, you know, it's going to lead to solutions that are actually not solutions, because humanity is going to reject them, and you know, they're just not going to work. So, I think what gives me a lot of hope is to see that you know, that I get letters from young people that you know, that decided not to, you know, glue themselves to the street or you know, do that sort of approach to you know, solving problems, but actually to channel that energy in a constructive way, to to start projects, to start companies, to choose a certain study through which they can become an inventor and work on new forms of energy generation, and just naming some examples. So it's so it's I think many people there's a lot of pessimism in the world these days, especially amongst young people, and especially about the environment, and giving them hope that problems are nothing more than things that need to be solved. I think that motivates them to actually get to work on them rather than end up in despair.
How concerned are you about the effect of climate change on oceans in terms of rising tides and collapsing currents, which some people believe could actually lead to a new ice age in Europe?
Look, I think it's all about timescales, right? So I think when it comes to human timescales, I think some of these scenarios are still quite far away. But then if you look at the geological timescales, 100 years is nothing, right? And I would love to see humanity thrive, not just for the next 100 years, but for the next 100,000 years or 100 million years, right? So I think in that light, we do live, I think, in a very special slice of time where the Industrial Revolution is essentially yesterday on a geological timescale, right? And that has given us a tremendous amount of wealth, and I'm immensely grateful for those who came before me and created the modern world. But we haven't achieved technological maturity yet as a civilization. We still have the problems. We still haven't managed the side effects, when it comes to the pollution, the CO2 emissions, etc., that this modern civilization is creating. So I think I think that is a key challenge that we have in this century. And of course, if we don't solve it in this century, the longer you wait, the harder it is. So I think I don't think the world ends in 10 years. At the same time, I do think these are real problems, and I think we can solve them if we do what humanity is good at.
A lot of people would be interested to know the average age of a CEO among Fortune 500 companies is 57. Now, you came onto the scene with a bang, literally, as a teenager, and you recently turned 30, and you've already accomplished so much. So what else do you have in store for the world?
Actually, this terrible turning 30 is, and it's like, I'm really starting to feel very old, actually. But
thanks, I'm double your age.
no offense. It's it's just, it's just to me the ocean cleanup. I think plastic pollution is a huge problem, and I think it will be an immense victory for humanity if we are able to solve this problem that's literally covering 2/3 of our planet. If we can send that to the history books, I think it's going to be huge, and that's what motivates me every day. At the same time, I hope that what we do at the Ocean Club can be essentially sort of a blueprint of how we solve problems in the 21st century. And of course, I hope that the Ocean Club's goal is to help itself out of business. At some point in time, all these systems should be deployed, clean it up, and then at that point in time, I hope I have the opportunity to work on many other problems. There's not a shortage of ideas. It's really about having to focus now on this problem. But who knows? In a few years from now, I really hope I get to work on some other problems.
Isn't it ironic that your biggest success would be to put yourself out of business? That is interesting.
Yeah,
that you achieve it.
It was actually quite funny. Like I'm not aware of any other nonprofit that makes that explicit. While I think the majority of nonprofits, they are about solving a problem, right? So that should be their whole goal. Their whole reason to exist is to help yourself out of business. But so I really hope that more nonprofits should make that explicit.
Well, on the note of like other people getting involved, another European CEO, Spotify's Daniel Ek, has put $1 billion of his own money into a startup fund to tech moonshots. Now, how much does it excite you when you see other tech-minded entrepreneurs seeking to solve global problems?
I think it's brilliant. And what's interesting, I think philanthropy has a unique, or I think entrepreneurs have a unique role to play because they are, they tend to be quite tolerant to risk. And I think what we, to have the greatest impact, you don't want to invest in the sort of safe bets because those things will happen anyway. I think what the ocean cleanup was when we started was really a sort of high risk, high reward opportunity where the chance of the ocean cleanup succeeding 10 years ago was super tiny. But of course, if we were to pull it off, it would have this huge impact. And I think we need more bets like that. Even if you just look at the energy problem, having very cost-effective and scalable energy storage, that's something that we don't have yet. Cost-effective ways of producing things like steel and cement in a way that doesn't cause pollution doesn't really exist yet. It's not cost-effective, at least. So I think to solve those things, what we need are those kind of bets that are sort of high risk, high rewards, and people like Daniel, they're in have an immense opportunity to support those things that governments tend not to do because it's still too early stage or too risky.
Well, a quick final thought then. Your ocean journey was triggered by the amount of plastic you saw in the sea while scuba diving in Greece. You touched on that briefly. Now, if you were to go back there today, or perhaps in 10 years, what difference do you hope or perhaps expect to see?
Yeah, I think saying about 5 to 7 years, I think all going well. And if we find the support that we need to now scale up the solutions, the solutions work, it's about scaling up now. But if we find those champions that are willing to help us make this scale, I think 5 to 7 years from now, is there any 16-year-old can go scuba diving anywhere on Earth and come across more fish than plastic bags.
Actually see the fish.
That's a future to look forward to, I think. Yeah.
Well, Boyan Slat, thank you so much. You may be the youngest guest. You are the youngest guest we've had on our show since we launched. But I think you have one of the most powerful messages. So more power to you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
The remarkable Boyan Slat. It'll be fascinating to see what he does with his next 30 years on the planet. I'm Riz Khan from me and the team. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place.
Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Your Excellency, I want to kick off by just asking you to walk us through how you see the role of public service, because it's not only a family legacy, but it's also a passion.
Just for some context, for those who might not know, my grandfather was Shaheed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. He was the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Pakistan. He gave us our constitution. He was a voice for the disenfranchised, and he gave his life for his country. He was sent to the gallows by a cruel and conniving dictator who sentenced him for a crime he did not commit. Only for 50 years later, for the same Supreme Court that was stained with his blood to come out and say he was innocent. Only proving my grandfather's last words, which were, "Oh God, help me, for I am innocent." My mother, Shaheed Mohtharama Benazir Bhutto, was the first and youngest female Prime Minister of Pakistan and in the Muslim world. And it was her pursuit for justice for her father which propelled her into politics. And hers was a turbulent journey. She faced police brutality, incarceration, character assassinations, too often used on women, exile. She was basically a mother raising her children, as well as fighting for my father's release from jail, and all the while running and leading the largest political party in Pakistan. So as you can see, it's not an easy legacy to live up to, but it's one that I can't walk away from. For my family, sacrifice, service, fighting for the greater good is all we know. My grandfather used to say that the paradise of God lies under the feet of your mother, but the paradise of politics lies under the feet of the people. And for my family, these are not mere words. This is our ethos.
How do you view this situation for women in Pakistan today?
What I've seen with my mother, and something that I still see today, is that women have to work twice as hard to get half as much acknowledgement as a man. But we are a strong and resilient force. The founder of our nation, Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, used to say that there are two great powers in this world. One is the sword and the other is the pen. And there's a great deal of rivalry and competition between the two. But there's a third power, greater than both, and that is our women. So the more time I spend on the ground, I see what a strong force we are. And with regards to the issues that women might be facing, whether it's in Pakistan or globally, you name them, we're facing them. Be it inequality, be it security, be it access to healthcare, education. But we are a strong and resilient force, and the more time I spend on the ground, I see that with the power of the vote, we manage to make our voices heard. And for those who haven't voted or for some reason are outside the voting apparatus, they too, when they join forces and rally together, their voice can make cities come to a standstill.
Yeah. You wear two hats. You're a member of parliament as well as being First Lady. How do you square the two? Because you need to be outspoken for your constituents, and at the same time, sometimes it's difficult to be political.
That's true. I've only recently become First Lady as my father became president, and as a widow, he decided to name his youngest daughter First Lady in order to fill that role and make sure that we have a strong representative for women and women's rights.
Do you feel like you have to hold back?
I have to hold back slightly when I'm in the arena of being the First Lady. But as a member of the National Assembly, when I'm on the National Assembly floor, I will be fighting for my people's rights, needs, and whatever they say to do, I'm their public servant.
Yeah. In discussing your family's legacy, it's impossible not to focus on the fact that politics, as you know, can be deadly. Right now, Imran Khan says he's under threat for his life. How credible, in your mind, are those threats?
I think that anyone who says that their life is in danger is a threat that we need to take seriously. But it is heartening to see. It is heartening to see that all the avenues are open to him. For example, all the courts are there for him to fight his cases. All his needs in jail, whether it be for his newspapers or gym equipment, are being met. And I would not wish anyone in Pakistan to face great difficulty, and I hope he will go through the avenues of the court, and the courts will have their verdict.
You've Are you confident he will have a fair treatment by the judicial system?
I think so. I do believe that he'll be able to put his case forward, and based on what the evidence says, they'll be able to make their decision.
Talk me through this. You have been a passionate proponent of the need for vaccines, particularly with regards to polio. When you see those in the United States, for example, President-elect Trump's pick, RFK Jr., who's a vaccine skeptic, does that worry you?
Right now, I'm more worried about the issues that Pakistan is facing. I'm sure that the United States has a rigorous campaign to, before you go to school, you have to get vaccinated. Before any large forums, there need to be vaccinations for your child to make sure that at every stage they get their vaccinations. But with regards to Pakistan, I'm an advocate for polio eradication in Pakistan. I've been their ambassador also for the United Nations and Rotary International. And the challenges we face are greatly different.
Yeah.
And some of in 1994, my mother actually gave me the first oral polio vaccine. And this was when she was Prime Minister at the time, and she often said that as a woman leader, she brought an additional role to her office. She brought that of a mother.
Yeah.
So she spearheaded this campaign across the country. Then I would have to say that the changes in government leads to an issue for us on the ground. We had a period of dictatorship under which the reality of the situation was simply not being reported. We went through another change in government under which all the stakeholders, be it the President, the Prime Minister, the Army Chief of Staff, all believed that this was an important issue and they were determined to eradicate this disease. Then we went through another change of government under which the government at the time did not take this seriously. And when the heads of government don't take this issue seriously of vaccination, there's a trickle-down effect. It trickles down to the bureaucrats, it trickles down to the health ministers, the health systems, all the way down to the health workers on the ground.
Yeah.
That this is not a serious issue. So I would have to say that that is one of the challenges that we're facing. A second challenge is that there was a misuse of our vaccination drive for security reasons, which brought about a lot of mistrust amongst our nation. We had clerics preaching that this vaccine would cause infertility and spreading misinformation. And this is an ongoing process. We have to take them on board as stakeholders and explain to them that this is the same vaccine that the United Arab Emirates uses, this is the same vaccine that Saudi Arabia uses, and they've managed to successfully eradicate this disease. So this is an ongoing process. But as a consequence of these two issues, we've had a lot of targeted attacks on our polio workers. There's been senseless killings of our polio workers on the ground, and our security forces also who are protecting them, and their only crime was that they were trying to fight for our future generation. Their crime was that they wanted to ensure that every single child was vaccinated. So these are some of the issues. And lastly, I would have to say our geography. We're on the border with Afghanistan, and we see a great deal of migration that occurs. And in that process, some children miss our national immunization drives. We've made progresses in this. We've put vaccinators at the border. We've put vaccinators in between cities and in between provinces. So we're determined to try and reach every single child out there. I would have to say that these are some of the challenges we're facing. But if I talk to you about the progress that we're making, I would have to say that, and the successes, I would have to say that every single child vaccinated is a success. Every single child we manage to save from this crippling disease is a success.
Yeah.
And until we reach the ultimate goal of a polio-free Pakistan, these are the successes that I need to hold on to and build on.
You mentioned geography. Obviously, you're in a position at this point where geography has a great deal of impact on not just foreign policy, but obviously on the situation for women. How devastating, in your mind, was the withdrawal from Afghanistan, your neighbor? Because at this point, it seems as if the international community doesn't or isn't able to help those women. We gave them great promise, and then we abandoned them.
With regards of the way the exit from Afghanistan was conducted, I think that record speaks for itself. It's devastating to see, but we have to have faith in the Afghan government and their systems to try, and we have to ensure that as a country like Pakistan, who is our neighbor, we can try and encourage them to, take on board our women and perhaps not go with such stern language when it comes to them. But it's also that they are their own country, and we can't dictate them to tell them what they should do.
Yeah. Do you happen to think that there's something that the international community could do to help women there that they're not doing? Is there a pressure that we could exert?
I think that it's a very difficult situation because in the manner in which they stayed and they exited, it causes great difficulty for anyone in the world to dictate to them what they should or should not be doing.
Yeah.
So I think engagement with the Afghan government is the best option we have.
Yeah. Tell me this, when you think back to the legacy of your mother, not just as Prime Minister, but also as a parent, what are some of the lessons?
As I get older, even 16 years on from her assassination, I realize that there was a lesson in everything she said and did. And despite the greatest odds, she managed to endure with incredible elegance, dignity, and grace. And if you've ever seen Succor Jail and the conditions she was in, you would see how difficult that was. So in the face of adversity, I can only hope and pray to have half as much elegance, dignity, and grace as she did.
For 16 years on, what is your advice to the women in this room as they look to take their place, not just as women, as mothers potentially, but also as those who are leading corporations, excited about being entrepreneurs and startups, and also going into politics?
My message to young women would be to believe in yourself, remain steadfast in your values, never underestimate the power of your voice. Leadership is not about privilege and position. It's shaped by purpose and persistence. And we must remember that the road ahead will be challenging, but we must embrace education, foster empathy, commit ourselves to uplifting all those around us. True leadership lies in service to others and the pursuit for justice, opportunity, and equality for all. My message to the younger generation would be that you are the architects of a brighter future.
Walk me through this one. As women, we often discuss how we are not just subject to the regular standards. We are also subject to even higher standards in what we wear and what we say and how we do our hair. Do you believe that that's evolving?
I would hope and pray that this evolves. However, I will give you an example. Well, it's heartening to see the number of women leaders across the world today.
Yeah.
I still think that we need to face issues that our male colleagues don't necessarily need to face. I can give you an example. I was in an interview with a prominent international news organization, and at the time we were talking about the crackdown on our party, the fear I had for my father's life in jail. This was his 2019 persecution against him, not to be confused with the 90s persecution against him. And at the end of the interview, I still get asked, but do you like to cook? So as women,
what do you like to cook?
But as women, we have to still prove today that yes, we can cook, we can clean, and we can lead. And we must simply have to endure and keep going.
Yeah, I mean, the unfair criticism I think that we've seen for women politicians across the board in the West as well. I mean, Hillary Clinton, not attacking her words per se, or challenging her words, but challenging her choice of outfit. Yeah.
I try to model my outfits on the basis of my mother, and it brings me a lot of comfort to have her white dupatta style around me. It makes me feel that I have her with me at all times.
And embrace. And just to close out our session, in your mind, where are we today in this region? Because the extraordinary strides made right here in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, for example, are inspiring, but the region still has more to do.
I think, number one, we must acknowledge the United Arab Emirates. Just look at this platform today. Many of our neighbors don't have this platform, and this is truly a global event. People from all across the world, all across nations, everyone has an inspiring story, a history. So I think that we need more platforms like this. And hopefully the region around us will also evolve into understanding the importance of women, giving them an opportunity, giving them a glimpse into public service and seeing how well they shine.
Yeah, and speaking of that glimpse into public service, what would be your suggestion to those in the audience today who are looking potentially to go into public service?
I believe that the world is your oyster and there is an opportunity everywhere.
Yeah.
And especially in the United Arab Emirates, just look at the number of cabinet members. Look at the people in His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid's office. The number of women has grown every single year. And I think that other countries around the world need to model this.
Yeah. Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Hadley.
At Arabiya News, we go beyond the headlines.
From the latest breaking news to in-depth coverage of global events.
We're not bought or sold. Nobody owns us.
The loss of life, the destruction of property. The conflicts are such a terrible thing.
Context and analysis to help you see the full picture.
The world is in a very dangerous place. Join us on Arabiya News.
It's very impressive.
Where knowledge meets perspective.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deep fake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on the Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Bali, home to some of the warmest, most welcoming people in the world. Bali. Travel the city and you're sure to be greeted with friendly smiles and accommodating locals. The people of Bali are known for being patriotic, and they would go out of their way to make tourists feel comfortable and make sure that they get to see the best of the city. For one, Bali is known for its rich culture and heritage. For the Balinese, religion is integral. There are in fact over 20,000 temples on the island dedicated especially for spirituality and community. The city is also alive with festivals and ceremonies characterized by traditional Balinese dance, music, drama, and local cuisine that every tourist would definitely want to be a part of. Bali is also known for its breathtaking natural resources. You should see its picturesque rice terraces, soaring volcanoes, pristine crater lakes, sacred caves, and lush tropical forests. Many visit Bali for its tropical beaches, while its dramatic coastline never fails to impress. Waterfalls are also popular in Bali, as the city has a lot to explore. Visitors also like to try whitewater rafting in Bali, try the high ropes courses, or visit the Kintamani volcano. Kuta is a mecca for surfers and backpackers looking for lively nightlife and great waves. The botanical garden is also said to be one of the best in the world. Bali is also great for shopping. Popular marketplaces are found in Kuta, Ubud, and Sukawati. You're sure to find endless rows of stores selling a variety of knickknacks. For more unique finds, you should visit Seminyak. Seminyak is Bali's answer to the hipster movement, where eclectic bars, cool cafes, and chic international boutiques fill the streets. Food in Bali is just as amazing. Almost every warung or local eat shops offer the best local dishes, from satay ayam to soto ayam to nasi goreng. It's where you get to eat delicious meals for very affordable prices. But there are also fine dining restaurants in Bali that will serve all kinds of food. The city, after all, takes on many influences from all over the world.
Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday here on Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up on the programme, Los Angeles is bracing for more destruction from unprecedented blazes. Officials are dealing with 5 major fires which have forced some 130,000 people to evacuate. The California wildfires have sparked a political blame game. President-elect Trump is hitting out at the California Governor Gavin Newsom for the destruction caused by the fires. After more than a 2-year-long presidential vacuum, Lebanon's army chief Joseph Aoun has today been voted in as the country's new head of state. Plus, we're going to be remembering Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, who's being laid to rest today after a state funeral in Washington. Hello and welcome to the programme. We're going to begin in Los Angeles County, where several areas remain under what's called a red flag warning, with forecasters saying that critical fire weather is going to continue right through to Friday night. Well, the fires are already known to have claimed the lives of at least 5 people, and at least 2,000 homes have been consumed by the flames. Well, some 130,000 people remain under evacuation orders. Well, firefighters are continuing to fight the Palisades fire, which has burned more than 17,000 acres, and the Eaton fire that has burned through Pasadena and Altadena areas, charring more than 10,000 acres. Well, Hollywood A-listers have not escaped the wrath of the wildfires. Paris Hilton, Billy Crystal and Adam Brody, just some of the well-known figures to have lost their homes in those deadly wildfires raging through the Los Angeles area. Meanwhile, the actor Steve Guttenberg compared the force of the fire as devil's wind. Let's take a listen to what he said.
Fires have started. The fires are like small little fires this big. And then all of a sudden, they just listen to this terrible wind. This is a wind that I've never seen. These are fires I've never seen before. The only wind I've ever seen like this has been in South Africa, the devil wind. There were people in wheelchairs trying to get out who didn't have time to put their footrests on. And we had to figure out how to pop a wheelie with these wheelchairs. There were little kids. There were mothers trying to find their kids. There were anxiety, panic attacks. It's terrible.
Well, we can speak now to Vince Vicari, who is a resident of Los Angeles, who was forced to evacuate his home and joins us now from Ventura, California, which is just outside LA. Vince, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us on what must have been a very stressful day or few days for you. Just tell us where you are now and how you got there and what it's been like these last couple of days.
Well, thank you. And it's great to be on the program. I'm currently about 60 miles north of LA and LA County up in Ventura, California. What helped make my decision to get to this particular area is because where I live is in the San Fernando Valley, very close to the Hollywood Hills, close to Universal Studios. And there's 4 fires that are all over, spread out on every corner of the San Fernando Valley. And when the Hollywood Hills fire started last night, I started realizing I had very few exit points left to leave the city if I needed to evacuate. I originally thought I was going to go to San Diego and head south, but after the Hollywood Hills fire started, I was worried about traffic and gridlock going south to leave the city. So with I-5 being blocked to go north up towards Sacramento, I really felt that my only option was to go up and around the San Fernando Valley and hook into the 101 North that hasn't been affected by the fires yet, and try and exit as far away as I can from LA before the winds and the fires picked up and did who knows what else.
I mean, it sounds, Vince, from what you're saying, like you're acting very much on your own initiative. Aren't you getting directive or instructions or information cascading down from the authorities there in California?
Yes, no, we are getting a directive, but what's happening is the wind shifts, the Santa Ana winds have been so strong and turbulent and unpredictable that they'll just shift without a moment's notice. And one of the things that's happened is they've reported that embers from a wildfire have traveled over 2 miles and then just settled somewhere on the ground and started a wildfire over there. And so because of that unpredictability, it felt like things were just kind of closing in on the San Fernando Valley. And because there's over 9 million people in LA County, I was concerned that if and when it's my time to go, I didn't want to wait until they said go because of all the traffic and gridlock. Because you got to imagine also traffic lights are out, power is out. So beyond these fires in LA County, there's a lot of instability in terms of electricity on the grid.
Right, so you could have faced a real bottleneck trying to get out of your area had it come to that.
Yes.
Did your neighbors follow suit, or have they stayed behind? And what do you know about your neighborhood right now? What the situation is right now?
It's all hit and miss. A couple of folks in my apartment complex were deciding to stay. One of the last deciding factors for me, I live in North Hollywood, kind of like on the border of Toluca Lake, Studio City, Hollywood Hills. A fire had started in Studio City out of nowhere from the Hollywood Hills fire. I guess an ember had come up and over the hill. That was a deciding factor for me because that was within 2 miles of where I live, and that was too close for comfort for me. So I talked to other friends. Some had evacuated hours earlier just in case. Others were trying to wait it out. So it's really just been up to someone's decision to wait until you're told to go or just go preemptively because things have been so unpredictable.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And as you say, a very rapidly changing situation. What could you see from your apartment when you were still there? And I mean, was it noticeable in the air quality as well that there were some major fires raging not so very far away?
Yes. Where I was located, I could see all 3 of the major fires. The Eaton fire to the left of me, which I guess would be the east, and then the Palisades fire to the right of me, which would be the west, and then behind me, north of me, was the Sylmar fire, or the Hearst fire. I could see all of those from the balcony of my apartment. And as I was sitting outside at sunset with my friend, catching up and taking a break, we saw directly in front of us the fire start in the Hollywood Hills. And that was just too much to take in because there's smoke coming from all angles, just drifting into downtown Los Angeles. And my vantage point was everything. And I had to go into Glendale, which is close to Pasadena, to get a tire fix because I had a flat tire due to a nail on the freeway the night before when I got off of work. And so having to wait for roadside service for over 2.5 hours also played a factor in me deciding when and how I should leave because I just kept seeing more and more fires pop up and there's still a whole nother day of wind gusts ahead of us.
So when you packed up your house, which you must have done in very little time, I mean, clearly you had to prioritize very quickly what you were going to take, what you were going to leave. And did you walk out of the door thinking, this place might not be here when I come back?
So ironically enough, I had just moved into a new apartment. So most of my things were already in boxes. So that made gathering my belongings very easy, fortunately for me. But I feel confident, but not completely confident that everything will be there when I get back, only because the wind shifts are unpredictable and chaotic is the most articulate way I can explain things. And even though I'm in more of a centralized part of a city, watching Pasadena burn is unprecedented. And watching the Hollywood Hills be evacuated down into Hollywood is unfathomable. Watching Santa Monica be under evacuation orders is something you never think about because those are such iconic places by water, by public, heavily populated areas, that it's not something you would ever think could actually happen. And then when you see that actually happening in front of you, it's terrifying. And you don't know what could be next, where these winds could blow and how far an ember could carry. And even if you are in a city part of LA County, that an ember could still spark a fire in a park or in an apartment building. And that is way too close for comfort for me.
Sure. And so in the last 24 hours, I mean, you must have come across a lot of different people with a lot of different moods. I mean, obviously fear being a very logical and very obvious feeling for people to have at a time like this. But what other sort of moods did you pick up on? I mean, is there a sense of anger, for example? Because we've been hearing, obviously, like every situation of this kind, it quickly gets politicized. I mean, are you sensing there is a blame game as well going on right now?
Where I've been, no, I've not experienced any kind of anger. It's more of just, this is terrifying. What can we do to help each other? And what do I need to do? And where do I need to go? And you got to keep in mind, there's a large population of people in LA and LA County who aren't native Californians. So I'm a native Californian. I grew up in Northern California. I have been seeing and experiencing wildfires for the past 15 years. But a lot of folks are brand new to LA and they are not privy to wildfires. And so a lot of them don't know how serious to take it, or they don't understand how fast a wildfire can move in these dry conditions. But I haven't heard any kind of anger or resentment. I was in the grocery store stocking up on perishables to put in my car and put gallons of water in my car. The mood was just calm, but also let's get things done. Let's get prepared and see what the directive is for our particular area. And also, everyone has friends and family scattered throughout the region. So everyone's also trying to coordinate evacuation efforts. Can we come there? Do you need help going somewhere else? That's been the focus that I've experienced in the past 24 hours, is monitoring what's happening and then trying to figure out where to help and where I should be prepared to go.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the firefighters have been heroic, and in some cases battling the fires against all odds. I mean, a real losing battle in some cases with what are called red flag conditions, really overstretched. But, you know, in some cases they're having to operate, you know, whole areas, like in Pacific Palisades, it's being reported they only had 2 or 3 fire engines, and some of them didn't even have any water. I mean, there must be a sense of, wasn't there some more adequate planning for this, given that, you know, there have been these predictable, you know, markers, like a lack of rain, you know, so obviously very dry terrain, and high temperatures, and all you needed was wind. I mean, there was an element of predictability, wasn't there, to all of this?
I'm not sure, because from what I've gathered, these wind gusts have been about 24 hours ago, we're at 90 miles an hour wind gusts. And since I've been here in Los Angeles for about 7 years, I have not experienced anything to that magnitude. And I can't speak to the areas in the Pacific Palisades because I don't live by the coast, but as well as in the Hollywood Hills and in Burbank and in Glendale, those areas don't typically see anything like this. So I personally don't know how anyone could prepare for this perfect storm, pardon the pun, of elements that contributed to this factor, with the drought, with the winds. And we only got maybe 48 hours notice that high winds were coming. And then from there, it's trying to figure out, okay, how impactful are these winds actually going to be? Is it just an abundance of caution, or is it actually serious? And it turned out to be actually serious.
Okay, and Vince, just before I let you go, I mean, obviously a lot of words are being used, a lot of cliches are being used to describe what we're seeing on our screens. And I mean, it really does look, and I'm not the first person to say this, but it looks apocalyptic. Other people saying it sounds like something out of a film. I mean, what's your way of describing what you've seen these last 24, 48 hours?
What I'm seeing is grim. It's hard to stay optimistic with you see all these smoke and fires around you. Even if folks aren't in ground zero at these fires, it is affecting the entire LA County region. It's grim, it's unpredictable, it's chaotic, and there's an uncertainty about what the winds will do next and how these fires will get under control and when, because as of right now, a whole day later, there's still zero containment for 2 of these fires, and they've burned collectively over 30,000 acres. So the unpredictability is one of the biggest things coming to my mind, which is why I didn't want to wait until they said it's an evacuation order. I said, I'm getting out of here. My stuff is packed. I don't want to wait until however many hundreds of thousands other people are trying to also leave the county at the same time. I want to get out now before it's too late and I get stuck in anything and regret not leaving sooner.
Okay, well, we hope you stay safe, and thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. Vince Vicari, thanks a lot.
Of course.
Well, let's get some more analysis, and we can speak to Dr. Chad Hansen, wildfire scientist and fire ecologist with the John Muir Project. Dr. Hansen, you're also the author of Smokescreen: Debunking Wildfire Myths to Save Our Forests and Our Climate. We'll talk a little bit about your book in just a moment and the arguments that are made in there. But let me just ask you, first of all, what went through your mind when you first started seeing pictures like the ones we've been looking at of the devastation and the scale of these infernos in parts of California?
Just shock and sadness. These are communities that I know well. I was born and raised in Los Angeles area, and I spent a lot of time in these communities. I have friends and family members who live in these communities, and it's hard to see the impacts. Especially some of the images of entire neighborhoods just wiped out. It's my heart goes out to all those communities that have been so heavily impacted.
And for someone like you who's been studying forest ecosystems, who's been studying these types of fires for many years, I mean, is there and was there a sense of inevitability about all of this?
Yes and no. There's an inevitability about it in terms of the weather events. The Santa Ana winds are an intrinsic meteorological phenomenon in Southern California. They typically happen in the fall or early winter, and they're very, very intense winds, extremely dry, coming off the high desert, off the Mojave Desert, over the mountains, and the winds roaring down those mountain slopes at hurricane speeds toward the Pacific Ocean. In those conditions, and when the relative humidity in the air is in the single digits, if you have an ignition, you are going to have very significant fires. And so, these are fundamentally weather and climate events. And climate change is certainly an influence and is exacerbating things. So the weather events will happen, the fires will happen. This was a particularly extreme one. There's no question about that, even for Santa Ana winds. But what's not inevitable are the losses of homes and lives. That is not inevitable. It is possible to do much, much better than that. But we have to shift policies away from our current approach and toward an approach that is proven to be far more effective.
Policies like what? Because, from what I understood from excerpts of your book, fires are part of the natural course of things in forests. They play a role, as you say in your book, as important as rain. So doesn't this boil down to the fact that humans have decided to live in areas that come with a huge degree of risk? Namely, if you live near a forest, there will be fires.
Yeah, there's certainly a land use planning issue here. But the reality is that in the United States, our forest, our wildland fire policy, our fire policy is basically focused on forests and forest management. This idea that if we remove a bunch of trees from forests, that's somehow going to stop fires or curb fires, and that's going to stop them from reaching communities miles away. Here's the problem. Number one, most of the communities that are impacted by fires and that are at risk from fires are nowhere near a forest. These are not forest communities in Los Angeles that are being impacted by these fires. They're in grasslands, they're in foothill vegetation, chaparral, shrub habitat. And so the whole conversation about forest management is completely divorced from the reality of where these communities are located. It's completely irrelevant, conversation to most of the towns that are actually impacted, especially in these current fires. But even in the towns that actually are up in the mountains, in the forests, these big forest management projects, these logging projects, usually under euphemisms like thinning and fuel reduction, they're not stopping fires. The fires are actually moving even faster, oftentimes, through these areas where thinning and other tree removal has occurred, and then they're burning down towns. So I think we need to rethink this whole thing and understand that this is not a wildland vegetation management issue. This is a community safety and community protection issue, and it has to be done at the community with home hardening, defensible space pruning immediately around each home, and evacuation planning and assistance. That's where the money needs to go. That's where the focus and attention needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, with the fire still raging, I mean, obviously it's a little early for us to be looking towards changes in policy. But obviously, do you see a day once the fires have been extinguished when perhaps there is a long, hard look at the policies surrounding safety there in California and fire safety in particular? And do you think they will put into place new measures and perhaps even barriers to try to protect communities from these kinds of massive fire?
Well, barriers wouldn't work. I mean, that kind of a conversation has happened before. The problem is that the great majority of homes that burn in wildfires, and this is true in these fires in Los Angeles area, the great majority of homes that burn in wildfires do not burn from direct contact with flames. They burn from the embers that are driven by the winds that are driving the flames. And those embers will go 1 mile, 2 miles, 3 miles, sometimes 4 miles in advance of the flames. And they will rain down by the millions. And anything that potentially can burn will ignite. And so that's why we have to focus on making the homes themselves and businesses and other structures, churches, schools. We have to focus on making them much more fire resistant. And there are a lot of simple steps that can be done to do that. And we have to focus on better evacuation planning and assistance to communities to do that evacuation planning, because and also doing the drills and the training so people know the best ways to get out of the community without creating gridlock and some of the things that we've seen where too many people are trying to get out a particular direction when there might be 2 or 3 other ways to get out, and then everything stops and no one can move and people have to get out of their cars and run from the flames. We've seen that multiple times, and we can do better and we can protect communities better, but communities need the help. The problem is, as long as our whole conversation is on subsidizing backcountry logging projects on remote national forests that are dozens of miles away from these communities that are most at risk, sometimes hundreds of miles away, what we're doing is simply ignoring the real problem and leaving these communities vulnerable. But, to your question, I think this conversation needs to happen at all times. It needs to happen after the fires, it needs to happen before the fires, and it needs to happen during the fires, because lives are at risk. The public safety is at stake here, and we don't have time to defer the conversations about the policy shifts that need to happen in order to keep people safe.
Sure. And just lastly, Dr. Hansen, you were mentioning there about the types of structure that are there and making them more fire resistant. One of the pieces I read has suggested that because of the fact that you're in an earthquake zone there in parts of California, buildings have to have a certain amount of flexibility, and that does therefore make them a little bit more fire risk, more flammable. Is that true in your opinion?
No, I've seen no evidence of that. You can take steps that are very effective to make a wood structure much more fire resistant. It's even better if the structure is not made of wood, made of materials that don't burn. But you can make the steel structures or masonry. There's all kinds of building materials that can be employed. But the main thing is that there are certain key things that need to be done to make sure that homes don't burn, regardless of what they're made of. Let me just give you an example, two examples in terms of what we call home hardening. One is just, if you drive around areas, in different communities, you'll see oftentimes accumulations of dry leaves on roofs that are sometimes 5 or 6 inches deep. And what happens is when the embers are blown by the winds far in advance of the flames, they will land on the roof and they will roll down and collect in those piles of dry leaves, and they'll cause an ignition, and it'll ignite the roof and burn the house down. That's a simple thing that can be done, and not everyone can sweep the leaves off their roofs. You know, there are people who are older and can't do it physically. They need the help. Some people can't do it financially. They need the help. Embers fly into attic spaces through very coarse wire mesh. Some of the older houses, you know, they have very coarse wire mesh, 1/4-inch mesh, and the embers fly right through that. They go into the attic, they ignite the attic and burn the house down. But you can very, very inexpensively replace those with a fine wire mesh, 1/8 inch, even better, 1/16 inch mesh, and the embers won't go through that. So there are really simple things that can be done that will that will prevent houses from burning, and of course, most importantly, keep people safe. But we really need to focus more resources there. Only a small fraction of our wildland fire resources are actually going to community safety. Most of them are going to subsidize some type of vegetation removal, usually tree removal, out in remote forests far from towns, and it's not working. It's a total failure.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for taking the time to share your expertise with us. Dr. Chad Hansen, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Republicans have been seizing on these wildfires that have torn through the Los Angeles area, blaming Democratic policies for the deadly wind-fueled fires. Well, President-elect Trump has taken to Truth Social media, saying that the outgoing U.S. President Joe Biden is to blame for the insufficient supply of fire hydrants and water. He also promised to end what he called gross incompetence and mismanagement when he takes office on the 20th of January. Well, President-elect Trump has also blamed the California Governor Gavin Newsom for the devastation and called on him to resign. While Trump and Newsom have clashed bitterly in the past over a whole host of issues.
If those people leave, you're going to lose half your tax base of California. This is a true tragedy, and it's a mistake of the governor, and you could say the administration. They don't have any water. They didn't have water in the fire hydrants. They don't have water. And yet they have. The water comes from, you know where? Up north. And it comes down at levels, they give millions and millions of barrels of gallons of water that they have, and they send it out into the Pacific. For the Pacific, it's like a drop, it's nothing. But for California, it would take care of the whole state. So what's happened is a tragedy, and the governor has not done a good job. With that being said, I got along well with him. When he was governor, we worked together very well, and we would work together. I guess it looks like we're going to be the one having to rebuild it. But what happened there, I don't think there's anything that I've ever seen quite like it. And the insurance companies are going to have a big problem, because you're talking about big, big dollars.
President-elect Trump speaking there. Well, Governor Newsom has hit back, accusing President-elect Trump of politicizing these wildfires.
One can't even respond to it. I mean, it's... You know, people are literally fleeing. People have lost their lives. Kids lost their schools. Families completely torn asunder. Churches burned down. This guy wanted to politicize it. I have a lot of thoughts, and I know what I want to say. I won't. I stood next to a president of the United States of America today, and I was proud to be with Joe Biden. And he had the backs of every single person in this community. He didn't play politics, didn't try to divide any of us.
California Governor Gavin Newsom speaking there. Well, let's cross to Los Angeles, and we can speak now to Jerry Edling, the editor for KNX News Radio in LA. Thank you so much for joining us. Just tell us, Jerry, what's happening around you and what the latest is with regards to those wildfires.
Well, basically, the wildfires are continuing to burn. There's no let up in the fire weather, and so they've already destroyed more than 2,000 structures. We're actually dealing with 7 wildfires in the Los Angeles area. The first one broke out in Pacific Palisades, which is a very wealthy area adjacent to Malibu, and has spread to the west to Malibu and sort of engulfing the entire Pacific Palisades area. And just last night, or yesterday, there was a new fire that broke out in the Hollywood Hills, also a very affluent area. These are all areas where celebrities have homes and things like that. Tragically, there have been a number of deaths in the fires. most of them due to, there was one in the Altadena area, and actually 3 people were found there, and there have been a total of 5 deaths. So firefighters are continuing to work against the fires, but there's not going to be a let up in the weather until the probably the end of the week.
And what's happening where you are precisely? I mean, can you smell smoke in the air? Does it make your eyes water? Are you not feeling like you're in danger yourself? Tell us what's going on around you, Jerry.
It's things around here are. It is a little smoky. It's not unbearable, but I'm talking to you from about probably 5-10 miles from the fires. And I can't see the flames from here, but I can see the smoke. It's like a billowing white cloud. And white is actually a good color because that means the firefighters are gaining a little ground on it. That's usually the smoke you get with the water. You get black smoke when they're not making any progress. But we still have 0% containment. But going back to where I am, we're a little south of the fire, and we're on the other side of downtown Santa Monica. So we're somewhat shielded, but everybody in the Los Angeles basin can see the smoke. I mean, with the 7 wildfires going, it's hard to miss.
I mean, you've been covering news events there in California for some time. I mean, when was the last time California saw something on this scale?
That's a really good question. I came here in 1995, and it was a year after the giant earthquake that was centered. It was called the Northridge earthquake, and it was centered in sort of northern Los Angeles. And that was devastating. When I came here, there were ground straps on all the buildings, and a number of apartment buildings were still red tagged, which meant they were totally unlivable. That's the only thing I can see that's comparable to this. This is the largest fire and fire disaster in Los Angeles County history. Los Angeles County being an immense county that includes not only the city of Los Angeles, but Beverly Hills, Malibu, everything but the city of Los Angeles. And so that's the only comparison I can give. We've had large fires since, but nothing on this scale, nothing in such a populated metropolitan area. All the others have been sort of in the outlying brush-filled areas. So this is incomparable in recent memory.
Just before we crossed to you, Jerry, we heard a clip of your governor, Gavin Newsom. We also heard the President-elect Donald Trump blaming Gavin Newsom, calling on him to resign. He said, quote, "This is all his fault." Do you think Gavin Newsom is likely to resign? And how do people there in California feel about this being politicized in these very early stages of the disaster?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't think Newsom is going to resign. He's actually very popular in California, and a lot of people on the left, particularly, are just going to dismiss what Trump said as more politics. I will say that this has been an ongoing battle. Mr. Trump has brought this up in the past about fire management in California, and that is a very controversial issue, and there has been some criticism on all sides of that, because California goes through a cycle. You basically have a wildfire. You lose the anchoring ground brush through that fire, and that makes it vulnerable to mudslides. And then the mudslides happen in the winter, and they clear out more land, and as a result, you have a lot of virgin land where more brush grows, and then you get another wildfire. So it's difficult to manage under any circumstances. But the California Department of Forestry and Fire Protection has taken a lot of criticism for that on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah, I mean, South California has had, as you've been saying, it's got this unusual cycle. 2 decades of drought, I gather, followed by 2 wet years, and then no rain for 8 months. And, you know, given that very unusual sequence of climatic events, I mean, very hard to imagine how the authorities there could have planned for such a scenario. I mean, is there a feeling there in California that planning was inadequate?
There is a feeling in some quarters that it was, and then other people say it's impossible to manage. I mean, there was even a chorus of people who say, well, maybe we shouldn't build there. You know, it's going to happen. Like, for example, Malibu is a good example. Malibu had a giant fire maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It was called the Woolsey Fire. And they're still talking about it. They're still rebuilding in Malibu from that. But now we have this other gigantic fire, and it's moving into the, it's already destroyed a number of homes in the southern part of Malibu, which is where a lot of beach houses are connected. It's almost like a row of beach houses, and a number of them have been destroyed. So Malibu is getting it again, but there's also a sentiment that why did we build here to begin with? Why not just leave it where it is and we won't have these problems? But anyway, it's a difficult state to manage, but there has been a lot of criticism of the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection. And the hope, I think the sentiment is that maybe the California could work with the federal government a little better on that. But who knows? It may just be an unmanageable situation.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Jerry Edling, editor for KNX News Radio in Los Angeles. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Now turning our attention to Lebanon, where lawmakers have elected Joseph Aoun as the country's president. Well, this decision comes after a 2-year vacuum and 12 failed attempts to elect a head of state. Well, the proceedings were not without drama. The first round of negotiations earlier on today were met with loud disagreements between a few lawmakers. Well, Lebanon follows a sectarian power-sharing system where the president must be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of parliament a Shia Muslim. Well, this often causes political deadlock. However, earlier today, a second round of voting following consultations delivered a victory for Aoun, who was the front runner. Well, this latest development is seen as a positive one for the country that's been living under a tense ceasefire with Israel, and as well as that, suffering from an economic collapse, and follows on from years of weak rule followed by widespread corruption. Well, most international aid for Lebanon is contingent on a functioning government. Meanwhile, the Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar was quick to congratulate Lebanon on Aoun's appointment, wishing him for, quote, good neighbourly relations and expressing hope that this would be achieved. Well, for the latest and an in-depth look as well at what this means for Lebanon, we're joined now by Michel Helou, the Secretary-General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. Thank you so much, Michel, for joining us once again here on Arabiya News. Are you pleased with this outcome?
Thank you. Yes, I think the outcome is positive. First of all, because it puts an end to a more than 2-year vacancy in the Lebanese presidency. Finally, Lebanon has a president, and without a president, not only there is no solid executive power, but also parliament cannot pass and vote laws. So the entire government was completely blocked. So this is good news. It's good news even more because the new president, Joseph Aoun, is a respected person, and I believe he will do good for the country. He will do some good work. He has, displayed his stances, his main political vision through a speech that was widely acclaimed as finally a good, solid political vision for the country. So overall, I think it is positive for the country. I think most of the parliament supported him, 99 votes out of 128. And I think also that a very large part of the Lebanese public opinion is supportive of Joseph Aoun, as well as a large part of the international community.
Okay, so you paint a picture of someone who's widely respected. You're giving me the impression you think he's the right man for the job. Very basic question, but just want to be clear on this one, because a lot of people might be confused. He's no relation, is he, of the former president, Michel Aoun?
No relation at all, yeah. Aoun is a very common family name in Lebanon.
Okay, now, of course, in Lebanon, there's a huge sense of mistrust between the people and the political class, and I think it goes back some way now. Do you think this step that's been taken today, the filling of that vacancy after 2 years, goes some way towards restoring that trust?
Yes, definitely. It's a step in the right direction. Let's be realistic. This is obviously not the end of the road. This is not, how can I say, a huge reform in itself or a huge step forward. But it's at least, let's say that it sets the beginning of the way. It opens the possibility of rebuilding and reforming our country. And I think that this in itself is a very, very, very important milestone. So this is why it's positive. It's also positive because let's not forget that we have just lived a devastating 14-month war and 4,000 people killed, more than 1 million people displaced, Israeli occupation of 60 villages in the south. So now what happens is with Joseph Aoun, we know that at least we have a solid president and a respected one, specifically from a security and military perspective, that can negotiate with the Americans and the Israelis and impose the proper implementation of the ceasefire. So this will allow us, inshallah, to put a complete end to the fighting, make sure that the Israelis withdraw completely from Lebanon, but also make sure that the Lebanese state reclaims the south of the country from all militias and specifically from Hezbollah. And also, even more important than that, make sure that Hezbollah hands its weapons back to the state so that we can disband all militias in the country. It's been more than 55, 56 years that the country is run by militias or is occupied partially by militias. This is the time for the state to reclaim the entirety of the territory. And I think now it is finally possible. And Joseph Aoun has said it very clearly in his speech, and that's very, very important.
Okay, so as we've been saying, he's got the support of Parliament. He's domestically respected. You were touching on there the sort of the international image that he has. And it's important, isn't it, that whoever the president of Lebanon is has the support of Lebanon's allies. And I'm obviously thinking of Washington, but not only. You're saying that Joseph Aoun does have that rapport. He does have the respect that he needs from Lebanon's main allies.
Yes, definitely. Joseph Aoun has proven a good soldier, a very good commander, has been in charge for close to 8 years now of the Lebanese army and has done a very solid job. He also has no rumors or no, corruption dossiers or topics around him or accusations, which is good in a country where, unfortunately, the political class is known for widespread corruption. So this is very good. He's a clean man. He's very respected and very, seen as a professional commander, be it by the Americans that have helped train him for the last decades, or by the French or by the Saudis, with whom he has very solid relations. So this will be very much welcomed by all those three powers that are, let's say, the top three countries supporting Lebanon financially, militarily, and politically as well. So I think it's a good step because, unfortunately, the state of the country does not allow us to, basically be completely isolated. This is what we've been suffering from over the last 10, 15 years, is that because of the grip of the Iranian axis through Hezbollah on Lebanon, we've been gradually put away and isolated from the international community. Joseph Aoun's elections helps us come back in the international community. At least it opens the possibility of us gaining back some trust from our partners, and they should be able to help us to rebuild, because we will need a substantial financial help in order to rebuild the country. Joseph Aoun will open the door to that.
Indeed, and when we were talking about allies of Lebanon, there's one very important ally that isn't a country, and that is, of course, the IMF. And they're going to be expecting big things from Lebanon in terms of reforms, and that'll all, whether or not those reforms are implemented will determine whether or not Lebanon gets the money it needs. Is Joseph Aoun going to be able to ensure that those reforms are carried out?
Not alone. Not alone, and this is where we will need a solid government. IMF is an absolute priority for Lebanon. So if you want to sum up in the end the two main large pillars that he will have to achieve, let's say, or build in his presidency, one of them is that the state reclaims its sovereignty from a military, defense, diplomacy, and security perspective. That is absolutely crucial. It is the first one, implementing the ceasefire, enforcing the monopoly of violence and of weapons in the arms of the state. And the second one will be the economic and financial sovereignty through reform. IMF reforms that will have to go through a proper Banking Resolution Act and distribution of losses. This is a difficult decision to be made. Currency reform and restructuring of public debt, because the country and the state are bankrupt today. In order to be able to do that, he will have to be able to work with a solid government that also has the same reformist agenda. So now the next step is to make sure that we appoint a solid, respected, reformist prime minister that doesn't have any conflicts of interest with any partners, specifically with the banks that are involved in the financial crisis that we've been going through for the last years. So we will be monitoring that appointment, and we'll be pushing a lot in order for us to have a reformist prime minister and a solid government to achieve the reforms and very quickly go through an IMF program.
I mean, the fact that Lebanon's been without a president for more than 2 years, and by the way, that isn't the longest that Lebanon's been without a president for in recent times. There was the period May 2014 to October 2016. I mean, doesn't this show that this system where we have a Maronite Christian who has to be the president, the prime minister has to be a Sunni, the speaker of parliament must be a Shia, I mean, doesn't this perhaps suggest that the system does need something of an overhaul, and is it likely to get one?
Before an overhaul, the system needs to be applied and respected. The biggest problem that we've been facing is not the system, is the no system or the absence of system. Because the constitution that was evolved, let's say, or rewritten in 1989, a Ta'if constitution, was never applied after the end of the Civil War. And this is the main issue that we're facing, and it's been changed. It's been violated so many times, and specifically after 2008 and the Doha Accords, after a mini civil war that Hezbollah caused in the country when they invaded Beirut. They forced to include some transformations to the constitution that has affected the ability of the system to work. So our goal is first and foremost to undo the Doha agreements of 2008, to come back to the proper 1989 Ta'if constitution, to apply it properly, which means ending the militias in the country, doing decentralization, proper independence of the judiciary, implementing the proper articles in the law that allow us to elect a president. The problem we have in electing a president is that there has been some, fake habits or let's say artificial habits that have been applied. For instance, the fact that they're asking for 2/3 of the MPs to be present and to vote in the first round in order for us to have president. Those are all, let's say, inventions that have prevented the system from working. So first, let's implement that system. Let's respect it. And then we will work on improving it, because definitely it does need improvements. You've talked about the importance of maybe overcoming sectarianism and the division of roles through sects and through confessions. Well, this is definitely something we need to work on. But let's be also realistic. Our society is still polarized along sectarian lines. So there's no way we can get rid of the sectarian positions right now, right away, especially at the top. If you do that today, at the top, presidency, prime minister, you cause, I believe, close to a civil war. So let's undo the system and the issues and the problems that it had caused, starting from the bottom, because there's a lot to be done. And gradually, along with creating and building a more modern society, less confessional, less sectarian, we will be able also to build a less sectarian system.
Okay, Mark, Michelle, just lastly, before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, a sort of a hypothetical question. On this channel, these last few months, we've been closely covering events in Syria and the downfall of Bashar al-Assad that no one saw coming. We saw the demise of Hassan Nasrallah and the degradation of Hezbollah. Would we have got to this point that we're at today, where there is now a president, and it looks like Lebanon is sort of going to stage something of a comeback by the looks of things? Everyone's optimistic. Would we have got to that point if those other events hadn't taken place?
Unfortunately not. And this is a huge issue. The reality is that Lebanese political parties have been blocking the election of president. On top of them, Hezbollah and their allies. So had Hezbollah agreed earlier on to elect a president, to attend the electoral sessions, we would have been able to avoid all that. Had Hezbollah agreed in 2000 or in 2005 or any time when we had those discussions to hand its weapons back, state and to respect the decision of the government, we would have avoided all that. We would have avoided the death and destruction of Hassan Nasrallah and the weakening of Hezbollah. After the collapse of Bashar al-Assad and of the Iranian axis, we finally have an opportunity. And my message to the Lebanese and specifically the Lebanese politicians is we don't have the right to squander that opportunity.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us on this historic day. Michel Helou, Secretary General of the Lebanese political party, the National Bloc. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
In other news, the former US President Jimmy Carter is being laid rest today beside his wife Rosalind in his hometown of Plains, Georgia. Well, Carter was 100 years old when he died, making him the longest living US president before his death, which is on the 29th of December. Well, after lying in state at the US Capitol for 2 days, Carter is being honored at the Washington National Cathedral. Well, the incoming US President Donald Trump is amongst those who have paid their respects. Well, for more, we can speak now to Paul Glastris, a former chief speechwriter to President Bill Clinton. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Paul. I know you never actually met President Carter yourself, but a number of your colleagues did. What did they say about him?
Yeah, a number of the writers and editors of the Washington Monthly, my magazine, worked as Carter speechwriters. And they had a very different relationship to Jimmy Carter than I had to the president I worked for, Bill Clinton. They, at the time of his presidency, both admired him and were deeply frustrated by him. And his presidency ended poorly, and it was a time of great frustration for Democrats and liberals generally. But to a person, each of them grew to admire the man more as the years went by, both for the issues that he wrestled with as president, as well as his exemplary and active post-presidency.
Yeah, that's something we've heard actually already on this channel, someone saying something along those lines, that President Carter's post-White House career was in many ways more impressive than his actual White House career. Why do you think that was?
Well, he really created the post-presidency. Prior to Jimmy Carter, no president had built a life and an active role in world and national affairs the way Jimmy Carter had. Richard Nixon wrote books and he had a library and so forth, but he was quite disgraced. Other presidents died before that their post-presidencies could take off. Jimmy Carter really wrote the book on that, and then you've seen other presidents, George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, to some extent Barack Obama, build off the model that Jimmy Carter created, but none other than maybe Bill Clinton has been as effective. Jimmy Carter ended wars. Jimmy Carter built countless homes. He inspired public service. He did so many projects. He was so energetic in his post-presidential years that I think it really, that is one of his great legacies.
Yeah, indeed. He was also blessed, having said that, with 40 plus years of post-presidential life, which not everyone has had. Do you think it's fair to say he was respected on both sides of the aisle, just listening to the sorts of tributes that we've heard the last couple of days?
I think within a certain measure he was. Jonathan Alter, who is a Washington Monthly contributing editor and biographer of Jimmy Carter, said that Carter was too conservative for liberals during his presidency and too liberal for conservatives during his presidency. He was somewhat a man without a country politically. And he's and he had a kind of curmudgeonly way about him, a lack of small talk, in a way not a terribly effective backslapping politician, that has made elected officials of both parties a little wary of embracing him. Yet I do think there is respect for what he did on both sides.
Yeah, I mean, even the incoming President-elect Donald Trump has paid his respects in front of Carter's coffin. He's going to be at the ceremony today in Washington. He described Jimmy Carter as a truly good man. What do you think is one word that you'll hear again and again associated with people as they pay tribute to Jimmy Carter?
I think good isn't a bad choice for the one-word description of Jimmy Carter. He really genuinely had deep moral fiber, deep moral vision. He was a very, very devout man, curious blend of both scientific acumen and deep spiritual faith and Christian faith. Almost an Enlightenment character. He was somebody who was a farmer, a nuclear engineer, a businessman, a nonprofit leader, a president. He really was a person of amazing capacities, but at the heart of it was a steel moral clarity that I think will be his defining attribute in history.
And of course, he won the presidency in 1977, promising good government and honest talk. And I'm just wondering, I mean, this is casting our mind back a very long way, I know, but what was it about the context in which President Carter became president that made those very simple promises really resonate with the American people?
You know, it's been a lot of years, and people of a certain age will remember it's almost innocent at the time, but Richard Nixon's prevarications, lying, and corruption really damaged the country's psyche. The public didn't want to believe it. They were scandalized by it. Jimmy Carter was the antidote and sold himself, famously saying, "I'll never lie to you." And he didn't really. He exaggerated. He did what other politicians do. But at his core, he was a moral and virtuous leader, arguably to his own discrediting, because he could have used more guile. He could have used more ability to manipulate, ability to craft unlikely alliances, a little bit more of the politician in him and less of the rector. But at the time, it was a breath of fresh air for the country.
And yet, 4 years later, he lost resoundingly to Ronald Reagan in 1981. I mean, what do you think changed? Or do you think perhaps it was the difficult circumstances of his presidency, the economy, a hostage crisis? I mean, what, in your opinion, was the reason for that massive change of fortunes for him?
I think Jimmy Carter was elected and then failed to be reelected for the same reason, which is in the 1970s, the old liberal playbook wasn't working. We had both high inflation and high unemployment, which the textbook economics said couldn't happen. We had the beginnings of the monopoly problem that is now with us, with OPEC controlling oil prices. We had an anti-colonial, radical, powerful Iranian revolution that threw things off. And Carter struggled to find new policies to deal with these new realities, and pick some that were visionary, like energy independence, others like transportation deregulation that turned out to be quite catastrophic. But he was casting about for new ideas to govern in a time of new realities, and he never landed on the right mix and the right message. Ronald Reagan came in with a clear, somewhat reactionary, atavistic, but easy to understand, free market fundamentalist view of cutting government and unleashing capitalism that the public thought was a better answer than Carter had. And we've lived with the consequences ever since.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to what's happening today, Paul, I mean, there's this state funeral in Washington. I mean, fair to say that's the greatest honor that can be given to a US citizen, that sort of funeral. I mean, really rare, isn't it, in this highly polarized political world to see such a roll call of high-profile individuals from both parties gathered in the same place at the same time.
No, and for somebody like me who's a little bit old-fashioned and believes that the presidency deserves decorum, that Carter is getting a little of that is a measure of reassurance. I wouldn't read too much in it. We have a president who's saber rattling in the Western Hemisphere and ran on issues that he's now backing off of, within even before he's been inaugurated. I think we're not in for a time of bipartisan comedy, but we have a little island of that at this somber moment.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Paul Glastris, former chief speechwriter to President Bill Clinton. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.